Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
From the AP bulletin, Kennedy apparently shot in head. He fell face down in back seat of his car.
There was also the shocking murder of investigative journalist Dorothy Kilgallen and her friend Florence Pritchett Smith. Dorothy Kilgallen was among America's most famous newspaper columnists in that day.
From the 1930s to the 60s, Kilgallen was one of the most powerful women in print. With a single mention, the cunning columnist could make or break a career.
This is Milton Berle.
Oh, there's a product involved.
Product?
Corn.
A very bright and very good reporter of criminal cases, one of the best ever.
She'd become obsessed with the JFK assassination. And she was using her newspaper column to publicize the gaping holes, inconsistencies, contradictions, and just flat-out lies in the official narrative about the killing of JFK. Dorothy Kilgallen managed to get a private one-on-one interview with Jack Ruby during a recess in Ruby's murder trial in February of 1964. Kilgallen's interview with Ruby was at Ruby's request. He had information he wanted to get out to the public. And Kilgallen had the biggest newspaper column and was writing constantly about the JFK case. Dorothy Kilgallen was the only journalist to ever get a private interview with Jack Ruby.
November 1963. The country was thrown into turmoil when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Lee Harvey Oswald was accused of the killing. Then Oswald was shot dead by Jack Ruby. Entered Dorothy Kilgallen, star reporter and columnist for New York's Journal American. The inquisitive journalist landed a secret interview with Ruby during his incarceration in Dallas. The following March, Kilgallen wrote in her column, "The point in this historic case is that the whole truth has not been told." Biographer Johnny Whiteside.
She was interviewing all sorts of people, really deep into the case, and running just series after series of stories in the New York Journal American that were asking a lot of seemingly unanswerable questions.
She started saying, this has to be a conspiracy.
After her interview with Ruby, she told her best friend and fellow journalist, Florence Pritchett Smith, that Ruby had given Dorothy Kilgallen, a treasure trove of information that was going to blow the JFK mystery wide open.
Alone amongst the mainstream press reporters, Dorothy began harboring suspicions that the so-called open and shut case against Lee Harvey Oswald was not so open and shut.
Dorothy was finding dissident witnesses, deposing them, publishing their testimony. She was going to Dallas. She was threatening to publish finally, and saying it would be the biggest story of her life.
Dorothy somehow obtained the Warren Commission report testimony given by Jack Ruby while he was in prison, while it was still classified top secret.
She had found, I think, several hundred discrepancies in the Warren Commission report. All our phones were tapped because they were trying to figure out how she had gotten them.
She said she was going to blow the JFK assassination case wide open and have the scoop of the century.
And Dorothy Kilgallen had started writing a book in secret as quickly as she could write. It was going to be titled Murder One. She was also very frightened as she was writing this book because she was well aware of witnesses and those with key information about the JFK case who just seemed to die suddenly, including two reporters she knew named Bill Hunter and Jim Cote. And lots of journalists working on the JFK case also died suddenly and unexpectedly. From Ruby, she had information about many of the key players in the CIA plot to kill JFK, including CIA operative David Ferrie, how the Dallas Police Department was filled with mafia, according to Kilgallen. She no doubt knew that Ruby, Oswald, Ferrie, and Tippit all knew each other. So Dorothy made sure that Florence Pritchett Smith also had copies of her notes, as well as drafts of chapters and manuscripts. Well, on November 5th, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen was found dead in bed at the age of 52 in her posh apartment in Manhattan. But she was not in her bed. She was in a bed in a guest room that she never slept in. She slept in her own bed. She also had all of her makeup on, including false eyelashes. What woman goes to bed without washing off her makeup and removing her false eyelashes? She was also wearing clothes that she would never go to bed in. She was ruled to have died from an overdose of sleeping pills in combination with alcohol. Her system was loaded up with 3 different kinds of sleeping pills and barbiturates. Then the next day, her friend, Florence Pritchett Smith, who had copies of all of Dorothy's notes, was also found dead. And of course, all of Dorothy's notes and manuscript drafts disappeared as well. And Jim Wilcott, the former CIA finance officer, became a whistleblower in the Oswald case. Wilcott confirmed that Oswald was a CIA employee and was a double agent spying on the Soviets. Wilcott said it was common knowledge at the Tokyo station that Oswald was a CIA operative. Wilcott explained that Oswald was recruited from the military to become a CIA operative and to be trained as a spy on Russia. And in the late 1950s, CIA men in the know often referred to the Oswald Project, according to Wilcott. Wilcott also testified that some CIA agents had told him the CIA killed JFK. And Wilcott testified that Oswald was being paid by the CIA through a fake identity. As the CIA finance officer, Wilcott said he did not realize he was paying Oswald through this fake identity. Once he found out, he was heartbroken to realize that he had played an unwitting role in the killing of JFK. And Wilcott and his wife left the CIA, no longer wanting to be part of this criminal enterprise, no longer wanting to be part of Murder, Inc. The House Committee on Assassinations had another interesting witness named Ann Egerter. She worked for James Angleton, the CIA's assassination chief. She had also seen Oswald's 201 file. She said that Oswald was a CIA asset and was either being investigated by the CIA or was being set up by the CIA to be a fall guy in a political assassination project. That project turning out to be the assassination of JFK. Another reason the CIA might have wanted to do away with Oswald is the Russians were onto Oswald. So Oswald was no longer useful to the CIA as a spy on Russia or on Cuba. So the CIA set him up to be the fall guy in the killing of JFK. If you're no longer useful as a spy, you can become useful as a fall guy. After the Wilcotts left the CIA and became whistleblowers for the House Committee on Assassinations, the Wilcotts were constantly terrorized by the CIA. They found it difficult to get work. They were followed everywhere. Their tires were slashed. They regularly received threatening phone calls. Their lives were ruined. Then there was Richard Case Nagell, a CIA double agent, who was arrested on September 20, 1963, after walking into the State National Bank in El Paso, Texas, and firing 2 shots into the ceiling. He said he got himself arrested on purpose because he would rather be in jail than commit murder and treason. Nagell worked for Field Operations Intelligence for the CIA. His job was to cover up CIA wet projects being assassinations. He also worked for the KGB as a double agent for the CIA, and one of his assignments was to monitor Lee Oswald. Nagell said the KGB knew all about the CIA plot to kill JFK in advance. The Soviets didn't want Kennedy killed because the Soviets knew that Lyndon Johnson was a CIA tool who would aggressively expand the U.S. war in Vietnam and intensify the Cold War. So President LBJ would be bad for the Soviets. LBJ was all on board with using tactical nukes in Vietnam. The KGB told Nagell to either kill Oswald or alert Oswald that he was being set up as a fall guy. And Nagell met with Oswald in New Orleans to alert Oswald that he was being set up as a patsy. Nagell says he sent a registered letter to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover saying that he had been ordered by the KGB to kill Oswald and that there was a CIA plan to kill JFK. Nagell thought he might be implicated in this assassination plot, so he got him arrested by shooting up that bank in El Paso. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison called Nagell his most important witness. After his meeting with Garrison, Nagell said he survived 3 attempts on his life. Nagell then made a deal with the CIA to stay quiet in exchange for his pension. The FBI denies ever receiving Nagell's letter, and since there is no letter, Nagell has been portrayed as a wacko. But then in 1995, an independent federal agency called the Assassinations Records Review Board got in touch with Nagell. They told him they would take him seriously if he told them everything that he knew and shared with them every record and every document that he had that would back up his claims. But before he could testify or share his records, Nagell ended up dead on November 1, 1995 in his bathroom in his house in Los Angeles. This was said to be a heart attack, but Nagell was in good health and had no heart issues. One MKUltra project was to develop untraceable poisons that would cause heart attacks. However, Nagell's son, Richard, had a key to Nagell's storage facility in Tucson, Arizona. Nagell told his son that if anything should happen to him, here was the key to the storage lockup. And inside the storage facility would be a purple trunk that contained all of Nagell's records and documents from his career at the CIA. But when Richard, his son, opened the locker and searched it, the purple trunk was gone. And the day that Richard traveled to Tucson to get the purple trunk, his house was ransacked while he was in Tucson. Okay, now back to the hatred between John F. Kennedy and CIA Director Allen Dulles. On October 2, 1963, President Kennedy announced that he would begin withdrawing U.S. forces from Vietnam. Yes, the Soviet Union was a threat, but should young Americans be sent 8,000 miles away to die in the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam? John F. Kennedy thought that made no sense. So JFK announced that he would start by withdrawing 1,000 U.S. military personnel from Vietnam. And he would continue to reduce America's presence in Vietnam gradually but consistently. And we would have been out of Vietnam completely or almost completely within 2 years had JFK not been killed. And by this time, JFK had fired his sinister CIA director, Allen Dulles. Kennedy also announced that he was planning to, quote, splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds, unquote. Yet it was Allen Dulles who was tapped by President Lyndon Johnson to spearhead the Warren Commission investigation into the killing of JFK. How did that happen? Also, what was Vice President Lyndon Johnson's role in the killing of JFK? Lyndon Johnson certainly had the most to gain from the death of JFK. He would become president. LBJ was also the most corrupt president in America's history, a thoroughly evil person. Even most Democrats would agree with this assessment today. And LBJ often portrayed himself as the co-president with JFK. After JFK's election victory in 1960, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, wrote a long letter to JFK on how LBJ thought this co-presidency, as he called it, would work. And JFK laughed LBJ out of the room. Both John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy hated Lyndon Johnson. But JFK picked LBJ as his vice president because he thought he needed LBJ on the ticket to win Texas. LBJ was the Democrat Senate Majority Leader, and he was from Texas. He had Texas wired politically. And indeed, JFK managed to win Texas narrowly in 1960 by 2% over Richard Nixon. Without winning Texas, JFK would have lost the presidential race to Richard Nixon in 1960. And both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy could not stand LBJ. But they needed LBJ on the ticket to win Texas. Also, very suspiciously, LBJ planned JFK's entire fateful trip to Dallas, where JFK would be assassinated. And LBJ spent much of the entire month leading up to the assassination of JFK at his ranch near Austin, Texas. And no doubt JFK was happy to have LBJ out of town during that period. But of course, he did not know that his trip to Dallas, which LBJ was planning every detail of, would end up in John F. Kennedy's death, a highly convenient death from the perspective of LBJ. Plus, why was the vice president needed to plan this trip? The president has an entire advance team to plan these trips. And JFK did not even want to go to Texas at that time. JFK had recently been to Texas. Why did he need to go to Texas again? But LBJ insisted that JFK needed to go to Texas at that time, for some reason. And there's much more that can be said about LBJ's highly suspicious behavior concerning how he planned JFK's trip. And maybe I'll do a video on that at some point. Books making the case that LBJ colluded with the CIA to kill JFK include Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ Killed JFK by Barr McClellan, LBJ, Mastermind of the JFK Assassination by Philip Nelson, and JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. All of these are good books. It's also highly unusual for the president and the vice president to be out in the open together for obvious security reasons. Yet LBJ was riding 2 cars behind JFK in the motorcade that day in Dallas. Plus, LBJ, pretty suspiciously, wanted Jacqueline Kennedy sitting next to him in his car, not next to President Kennedy, her husband. F that, JFK told LBJ. And then, of course, when Lyndon Johnson became president after John Kennedy was assassinated, he immediately fired Robert Kennedy as Attorney General. And minutes after JFK was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Lyndon Johnson had his luggage moved from Air Force 2 to Air Force 1. He did this immediately. And this struck many as more than a little inappropriate. LBJ, when he got onto Air Force 1 by himself, poured himself a drink. He took his shirt off, sprawled out on JFK's bed, the bed in Air Force 1 that JFK and his wife Jacqueline were in that day. And then Jackie surprised LBJ when she arrived at Air Force 1. Her dress was drenched in her husband's blood. She arrived there with others, and everyone was shocked to see LBJ in Air Force 1 relaxing in the Kennedy bed. Now, of course, LBJ was automatically the president at that point, but just basic decorum would say that he should have taken Air Force 2 back to Washington. Instead, he remained on Air Force 1 and demanded that Air Force 1 not take off until a judge, a friend of his, could arrive to swear him in as president. And they waited there for hours for this judge, this state judge, to arrive to swear in LBJ as president. And LBJ did not need to be sworn in as president at that instant. He was already president automatically, by law. And he'd already been sworn in as vice president. He could have certainly waited until the next day or even a few days. But he insisted on being sworn in as president that minute on Air Force 1. And there's Jackie Kennedy standing there shell-shocked. It's almost like LBJ was trying to rub Jackie's nose into it here, being deliberately appalling. And everyone was dumbfounded by LBJ's behavior. What a sick puppy LBJ was. A true psychopath. And LBJ was a strong advocate of dramatically escalating the U.S. war in Vietnam. He was a tool of the CIA and the national security state. And as soon as he was sworn in as president, LBJ swung into action immediately to cover up the JFK assassination. So let's listen to President Lyndon Johnson and his FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, plot the cover-up of the killing of JFK, and how this cover-up would be achieved by the launching of this fake investigation called the Warren Commission. And this conversation took place on November 29, 1963, 7 days after the killing of JFK. And the first speaker here is LBJ, and the second speaker here is J. Edgar Hoover.
Yes.
J. Edgar Hoover on 2192.
Are you familiar with this proposed group that they're trying to put together on this study of your report and other things? 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, somebody in the court, a couple outsiders?
No, I haven't heard of that. I've seen the reports on the Senate investigating committee that they've been talking about.
Yeah, well, we think if we don't have... I want to get by just with your filing your report.
I think it would be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations.
Well, the only way we can stop them is probably to appoint a high-level one to evaluate your report.
Yeah.
And put somebody that's pretty good on it from that I could select out of the government and tell the House and Senate not to go ahead with the investigation.
Yes.
Because they get up there and get a bunch of television going, and I thought it'd be bad.
It'd be a 3-ring circus.
Yes. What do you think about Allen Dulles?
I think he would be a good man.
What do you think about John McCloy?
I'm not as enthusiastic about McCloy. He's a good man, but I'm not so certain as to the matter of the publicity that he might seek on it.
Maybe try to get Dick Russell and maybe Cooper in the Senate.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know. You know anything? Any reason? Just talking to me and you're going to talk like brothers.
Yeah.
No other is any reason? Any there? I thought Russell could kind of look after the general situation.
Russell would be an excellent man.
I wouldn't want Javits or or some of those folks on it.
Javits plays the front page.
Cover. I know Boggs.
I know Boggs.
He's kind of author of the resolution.
Yes, I know him.
Now Walter tells me, Walter Jenkins, that that you've designated Deke to work with us like you did on the Hill.
I have, yes.
I tell you, I sure appreciate that. I didn't ask for it because I knew you knew how to run your business better than anybody else, and I just want to tell you, though, that we consider him as high class as you do, and it's a mighty gracious thing to do, and we'd be mighty happy, and we salute you for knowing how to pick good men.
Well, that's mighty nice of you, Mr. President, indeed. We hope to have this thing wrapped up today, but we probably won't get it before the first of the week.
Well, I'm going to take every precaution I can, and I want
to
talk to you, and I wish you'd put down your thoughts on that a little bit, because you're more than the head of the Federal Bureau, as far as I'm concerned. You're my brother and personal friend, and you have been for 25, 30 years. Well, I've got more confidence in your judgment than anybody in town. So we'll put on some of the things you think ought to happen, and I won't involve you, quote you, get you in jurisdictional disputes or anything, but I'd like to at least advocate them as my opinion.
I'll be very glad to, indeed. I certainly appreciate your confidence.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Fine, President.
And a memo by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who was very much part of the cover-up, part of the cabal, dated November 24, 1963, 2 days after the JFK killing. Well, Hoover writes this, quote, "The thing I'm concerned about is having something issued so that we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin," end quote. And to accomplish this objective, President Johnson establishes the Warren Commission, named for Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, who would be the rubber stamp presiding over this commission. The one who would actually run this investigation would be Warren Commission member Allen Dulles, who JFK had just fired as CIA director. Now let's consider the path taken by the so-called magic bullet. Now remember, it said that only 3 shots were fired, and the 3 spent bullet casings were found lined up neatly in a row at the window from where Oswald was supposedly firing from.
Just before Oswald's arrest, 2 different rifles had been found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Patrolman Roger Craig and Seymour Weitzman had discovered a 7.65 Mauser.
We weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches from the rifle, and stamped right on the barrel of the rifle was 7.65 Mauser.
The other rifle found was a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano. Roger Craig was also one of the first policemen to find the spent shells from the Mannlicher Carcano, Oswald's rifle, which to him had landed in a very unusual manner after firing.
Deputy Sheriff Luke Mooney was with me when we found the shells. We found 3 hulls beside the window on the 6th floor. They were lying 3 in a row, not more than an inch apart, all pointing in the same direction.
But Kennedy was not the only one struck by bullets. Texas Governor John Connally, who was in the seat in front of John F. Kennedy, was also shot. He had multiple gunshot wounds in him and was critically injured. There were 3 bullet holes in Governor Connally. But we're told that just 3 shots were fired. Again, 1 shot missed, 1 shot hit Kennedy in the upper back, 1 hit Kennedy in the head. They say in the back of the head, but we have seen and proved that the bullet clearly struck the front of JFK's head. And then we're told to believe that the bullet that hit Kennedy in the upper back then supposedly went down, hit one of Kennedy's ribs, then ricocheted upward, then ricocheted off either his jawbone or neck vertebrae, back downward, exiting through Kennedy's lower throat area, striking Connally's upper arm, then striking Connally's wrist, then striking Connally's left thigh. So that's the so-called magic bullet theory, also called the single bullet theory. 1 bullet, we're told, did all that. Also, the bullet wasn't found immediately. Connally was rushed to the hospital. Doctors could not find the bullet in Connally, but then we're told that the bullet was found on the gurney, that the bullet had fallen out of Connally's leg. Is that possible? Do bullets just fall out of bullet wounds? And here's the bullet right here. It looks almost new. Now, almost everybody knows that when a bullet hits bone and ricochets off several bones, it becomes very badly deformed. Lead is soft, it breaks apart. It doesn't come out looking almost new.
Look, here is the actual bullet. In the lower left, you're looking at the nose of the bullet. On the right, the base. That is the only part of the bullet that showed some deformation, the base of the bullet, possibly from the impact of the firing mechanism, although that's arguable. The entire bullet is intact. A couple little markings that you see at his nose as it lies in its transverse position, where the FBI properly took some small pieces for metallurgical examination. This is the bullet that has produced 7 wounds in 2 men, that has destroyed 4 inches of the governor's right 5th rib anteriorly and produced a comminuted fracture of the radius. This is the bullet, okay? God comes to me and says, Wecht, enough of this stuff with JFK. There are other things to do. I'm going to allow you to keep one thing. And I mean, says God, one thing. I don't mean a compendium. I don't mean a set. I don't mean a bunch of this or a collection of that. I mean literally one thing. God, this is it. This is the government's picture. In science, we do things experimentally. We try to recreate. We try to prove or disprove something. So what do you do with bullets? You fire them into either water or cotton wadding to see what the bullet will look like having struck nothing, just coming the rest. They did that. Then the second set of targets consisted of goats, which they lined up so that the goat could be shot through the chest to break a rib to simulate Connolly's rib fracture. Then they got human cadavers and they lined them up to shoot through the distal end of the radius to simulate Connolly's radial comminuted fracture. The government did that. They then, not Wecht, not any of my colleagues, the government put this picture together. So this is their compilation. Coming in from the left, second and third bullets closely aligned. Those are bullets that went into cotton wadding, striking nothing. Striking nothing. Look at the base. Okay? Second from the right, almost looks like a different caliber. It's not. It's the same exact bullet, but it's misshapen. That is a bullet that went through the rib of a goat. The bullet to the far right at the very end is a bullet that broke an ulna in a human being. The government, not Wecht, not any of my colleagues, the government, the Warren Commission people, they did this. This was their experiment. They chose the representative bullet from each of those different targets to prove the validity of the single bullet theory. If a bullet that breaks a rib can look like this, and a bullet that breaks a radius can look like this, is there anybody here amongst you that has the slightest difficulty in understanding and comprehending how a bullet that breaks both a rib and the ulna can look like that? No problem, right? This is the one thing, God, I take with me to my grave. You can have everything else, but I want this picture alone. That is the government's case. Okay?
And also, Jack Ruby was seen at the Parkland Memorial Hospital, at the Dallas Hospital. And a lot of people believe that Jack Ruby was the one who planted the bullet, that really new-looking bullet, planted the bullet on the gurney, because nobody saw this bullet on the gurney or in John Connolly before that. So that's your magic bullet theory. John Connolly didn't buy it. He believes there had to be multiple shots, multiple shooters.
And then we had just turned the corner. We heard a shot. I turned to my left. I was sitting in the jump seat. I turned to my left to look in the back seat. The president had slumped. He had said nothing. Almost simultaneously, as I turned, I was hit. And I knew I'd been hit badly. And I said, I knew the president had been hit, and I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. And then there was a third shot, and the president was hit again.
He even yells, when this is happening, they're going to kill us all. And interestingly, he said they, as in they're going to kill us all. He thinks it's a they. Connally believes the car is under fire from multiple directions and angles.
A lot of strange things happened surrounding the assassination that there's no good explanation for it.
But what's your personal analysis of the Warren Commission?
I think the whole autopsy matter was badly handled. I think the research on the president's body was not well done.
How many shots were fired?
Three. Two of the shots fired at the president were splinted. The third shot, which hit the president, he was hit for the first and the third. The second shot hit the governor. The third shot is a complete bullet. That wasn't shattered.
Were they aiming at the president?
They were aiming directly at the president. Those three shots were fired within 3 seconds.
How did it happen? They hit Connally.
Connally turned to the president when the first shot was fired, and I think in that turning, it was where he got hit.
So there you go. Even at this point, Hoover is wondering how they're going to explain how Oswald could have squeezed off 3 shots in 3 seconds. Hoover says 3 seconds. The official account now has it at 6 seconds, and it sounded more like 3 seconds to me. But whether it's 3 seconds or 6 seconds, it would have been impossible for Oswald to have fired 3 shots so quickly with that bolt-action rifle, and to have had 2 out of 3 shots hit the target in a moving vehicle from 265 feet. Minutes after JFK is shot, CBS News interrupts regular programming with Walter Cronkite telling us 3 shots had been fired at President Kennedy, and that President Kennedy had been hit. But how would Walter Cronkite know that 3 shots had been fired at this point so soon after the shooting, minutes after the shooting? We could not know that until there had been an investigation. He also knew many other details minutes after the shooting. It's almost as if Walter Cronkite had been handed a script that had been written in advance. And less than 15 minutes after the shooting, the police were broadcasting a description of a white male that closely matched Oswald. How could the police know who to look for within 15 minutes of the killing of JFK? Well, because the script was written in advance. And by the next morning, newspapers had already published a biographical history of Lee Harvey Oswald, including that he had defected to Russia and was a pro-Castro unhinged Marxist, with an emphasis that Oswald acted alone, had no help. How could they know that? Oswald was portrayed as a lone, unhinged, ne'er-do-well wacko. The U.S. government wanted to downplay any role the Soviet Union might have played in the assassination, as the American people might have demanded war with the Soviet Union if they thought that Oswald was acting as an agent of the Soviets. So there was a fine line that the government had to travel with its propaganda line in its framing of Lee Harvey Oswald. The propaganda narrative was that Oswald was an unhinged fanatic communist who acted alone. And Jack Ruby was also an unhinged wacko who acted alone to kill Oswald. And then let's listen to what FBI field agent James Hosty had to say. Hosty was based in Dallas. And Hosty seems like a good guy, just a rank-and-file FBI agent trying to do his job. Before the assassination, he was told by his superiors at the FBI office in Dallas to look into Oswald. It looked pretty odd to the FBI office in Dallas that this guy Lee Harvey Oswald, who had defected to the Soviet Union, was now back in the United States with a Russian wife. Why isn't Oswald in prison for treason? Hosty wondered. But Hosty was then ordered by the highest levels of the U.S. government to back off of his investigation. Let's hear Hosty talk about it.
I was approached by one of the senior agents from the counterintelligence squad and was told that there were now new orders and I was not to talk to Oswald anymore and I was not to cooperate with the police department in any manner concerning Oswald's background. I have since determined that those orders came directly from Assistant Director William Sullivan, who was in charge of the Foreign Counterintelligence Squad. He was also the person who had direct liaison with the National Security Council. The National Security Council is the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. That's about as high as you can get.
He was just trying to do his job, trying to help the FBI and the Dallas police find out more about Oswald. But the Dallas police and rank-and-file FBI agents like Hosty were ordered to stop investigating Oswald. The FBI had their man, and they knew all the facts. They didn't need any more help from FBI investigators or Dallas police investigators. They had their man. End of story. No more facts needed. Now, when I was a kid, my dad and mom would watch Walter Cronkite tell us the news every night. I was 5 years old when JFK was assassinated. I remember that very well because my cartoons, I think I was watching Popeye the Sailor Man, was interrupted by the news. And I knew it was pretty important because my mom started crying. But we all assumed that Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, was telling us the truth. But we now know from the Church Committee hearings of 1975 that CBS News was a mouthpiece for the CIA's Operation Mockingbird, as were ABC, NBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. The CIA had operatives working in these so-called news organizations, which were really not news organizations at all. They're CIA propaganda organizations, as they are today. All these legacy media outlets were co-opted by the CIA according to the 1975 Church Committee investigation, and continue to be the CIA's propaganda organs today, along with CNN. And Google was launched with grants from the CIA and the National Security Agency. The CIA continues to be Google's biggest customer. The CIA and NSA are tracking your every keystroke, monitoring your every movement through Google and big tech, which are all partners with the CIA, helping the CIA, the FBI, and the U.S. government build your digital prison. The Church Committee also discovered that the CIA had a manual on how to conduct assassinations. This manual literally describes a tactic to make an assassination look like it was carried out by an unhinged fanatic, driven by political ideology, religion, or by revenge. And it's important, according to this manual, for the assassin to die in the act. In other words, the plan was that Oswald was supposed to die on the streets of Dallas, following the killing of police officer J.D. Tippit 45 minutes later and 3 miles from the JFK assassination. And cop killers, of course, usually end up dead, right? The police will use any excuse to kill a cop killer, naturally. But that didn't go according to plan either. So in a final act of desperation, Jack Ruby had to kill Oswald in the basement of that police station, with 60 cops looking on. But the truth is, Oswald fired no shots at JFK and had nothing to do with the killing of Officer Tippit. Officer Tippit was just cannon fodder for the CIA. On October 2 of 1963, just a little less than 2 months before the killing of JFK, JFK had announced that he would begin America's gradual withdrawal from Vietnam. This was like planting a stake in the heart of the military-industrial complex vampire. This announcement by Kennedy put a big target right on his head. From that point forward, it would be non-stop assassination attempts on JFK. Now we need to talk about 3 more assassination attempts on JFK in November of 1963. In the weeks leading up to November 22nd, when they finally killed JFK. That's right, there were 3 more assassination attempts on JFK that November. The CIA, with help from the FBI, had planned to kill JFK in Chicago 3 weeks before JFK's killing in Dallas. This is according to Abraham Bolden, who was a Secret Service agent protecting JFK. Abraham Bolden was the first black Secret Service agent in America's history, and seemed to be one of the few honest Secret Service agents trying to do his job and protect the president. According to Bolden, the Chicago Secret Service office learned on October 30, 1963, that an assassination attempt on Kennedy would occur on Saturday, November 2. This attempt would be made as JFK's motorcade would travel from O'Hare Airport to Soldier Field to attend the Army Air Force football game. 4 snipers with high-powered rifles would be put in position to shoot Kennedy, who would be killed as his motorcade came down the Northwest Expressway and into the Chicago Loop. This tip came from a landlady of a Chicago rooming house. She had rented rooms to 4 men. She had seen 4 rifles with telescopic sights in one of the men's rooms. together with a newspaper sketch of the president's route. The fall guy for the assassination was going to be a man named Thomas Arthur Valley, an ex-Marine who looked a lot like Oswald. He was also, like Oswald, given a job shortly before this at a printing company at 625 West Jackson Street, which conveniently had a window overlooking exactly the route where JFK would be traveling in his motorcade. Now remember, following this same modus operandi, Oswald landed his job at the Dallas Book Depository Building 5 weeks prior to the killing of JFK. But JFK's Secret Service detail was tipped off about the assassination plot in Chicago, so aborted the trip to Soldier Field at the last minute, and Valley was arrested on Saturday morning. Valley was portrayed as a lone right-wing extremist who had planned to assassinate JFK. The police found an M1 rifle at Valley's house and 300 rounds of ammunition in the trunk of his car. And it turns out that Valley also worked in Japan on the top-secret U-2 spy plane program. Turns out also that Valley had worked for the CIA at a training camp in Long Island where he trained Cuban exiles in the art of assassination. Also, a car with license plates traced to Oswald was spotted in Chicago at the time of the aborted JFK assassination attempt in Chicago. Oswald was probably the backup fall guy, if Thomas Arthur Valley had not worked out. Are you seeing a pattern yet? But the problem with this thesis is that Oswald did not drive. Oswald took buses and taxis. So a car in Chicago with license plates that track back to Oswald is a curiosity. Plus, the real Lee Oswald was working at the book depository in Dallas. This might be one of the many Lee Harvey Oswalds that keep popping up. The Secret Service agent who exposed this assassination attempt in Chicago, Abraham Bolden, tried to bring this to public light and was promptly arrested and convicted of accepting a bribe. Abraham Bolden was America's first black Secret Service agent. There didn't seem to be much evidence that Bolden had taken any bribes, but he was put in solitary confinement. Also, his garage at his home was burned down, and his family was terrorized nonstop for many years. And later, Abraham Bolden publishes a book about this. I can't find out what happened to Thomas Arthur Valley, the would-be fall guy for the killing of JFK in Chicago. If anyone can find some information on what happened to Valley, please leave it for me in the comments. I'd be very interested to see that. JFK was also supposed to be killed in Tampa, Florida, 4 days before his actual death in Dallas. All this is detailed in a 900-page book titled The Ultimate Sacrifice by Lamar Waldron and Tom Harmon. Waldron is a well-regarded historian. His book is well-sourced, has 2,000 endnotes. The Tampa gunmen were supposed to fire at JFK from a window in the Floridian Hotel, the tallest building in Tampa. And the patsy, or the fall guy for this assassination attempt, was supposed to be a Cuban named Gilberto Policarpo Lopez. Again, the exact same pattern. And Waldron's sources are former Tampa Police Chief J.P. Mullins, Chicago Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden, and a confidential law enforcement source. Tampa mob boss Santo Traficant Jr. allegedly called off the assassination attempt. In his testimony to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Traficant admitted working with the CIA from 1960 to 1961 as part of a CIA plot to poison Castro, but denied trying to kill JFK. However, FBI informant Jose Ailman told the House Committee that he predicted to Traficant that JFK would win re-election in 1964. And Traficant answered, according to Ailman, quote, "No, Jose, he's going to be hit." And by hit, Traficant, of course, meant JFK would be killed. Ailman said he reported Traficant's comments to the FBI. And this assassination plot in Tampa was reported in a story in the Tampa Tribune that ran on November 23rd, the day after the actual killing of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. So this aborted assassination attempt on JFK in Tampa was known by the Tampa Tribune prior to the successful killing of JFK in Dallas. JFK had also planned to be in Miami in November. That trip was also canceled because of a report that JFK would be killed in Miami. And on November 9th, Miami police indeed did uncover a plan to assassinate the president with snipers from office buildings. Police informant Willie Somerset secretly recorded a conversation he had with anti-Castro activist Joseph Miltier, in which Miltier outlines the assassination plan. That sounds exactly what would happen a few weeks later in Dallas.
They're going to really try to kill him.
Miltier was arrested and questioned by police, but never prosecuted. Was Miltier a CIA asset? I don't know, but he seemed to have inside knowledge. This begs the question. If there were 3 known assassination attempts on JFK, one in Chicago, one in Tampa, one in Miami, within 3 weeks of the actual assassination, why was JFK allowed to campaign in an open convertible? No protection whatsoever, knowing for a fact that the CIA or the mob or both were hell-bent on killing JFK. And remember, the CIA was a partner with organized crime in carrying out assassinations inside the United States. The lack of security was very analogous to the lack of security given to Donald Trump on purpose in the 2 assassination attempts against him last summer. And I cover that in this video here. If the goal is to kill the president, providing little or no security is certainly a big help.
A couple hours before Kennedy was to arrive, the sheriff called us in, what I call the street people, the plainclothesmen, the detectives, and he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade, that we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Dealey Plaza in Dallas turned out to be the ideal venue to kill the president. Windows pretty much in every building were wide open. The president was in an open-air convertible. People were lining the streets. And then these Secret Service agents on the running boards of JFK's limo did absolutely nothing when bullets were raining down on the car, hitting JFK and Texas Governor John Connally. It's almost as if the Secret Service was trying to kill JFK, just like the Secret Service, then under the control of the Biden regime, tried to kill President Trump by purposefully providing him inferior protection, not even following the most basic security protocols.
The assassination would not have been attempted without assurance that certain members of the Dallas police force were going to cooperate. I think it's fair to describe the assassination as essentially a no-risk operation.
Another mysterious death was that of Rose Charmaine, who was a stripper at Jack Ruby's club. She said Oswald and Ruby were close friends. This information, of course, would be very damaging to the narrative that both Oswald and Ruby acted alone, didn't know each other. Oswald was supposed to be a lone kook, so was Ruby, according to the official narrative. But on September 4, 1965, Rose was found dead in the middle of the road in Big Sandy, Texas, weirdly next to a pile of suitcases. She had a wound in her head that looked like a gunshot wound, but she was buried quickly without a proper autopsy. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison wanted her body exhumed so he could get an autopsy done, but the state of Texas denied his request. And of course, LBJ, being from Texas, being President of the United States, had Texas wired politically. So obviously Jim Garrison's request that Rose's body be exhumed so he could get a proper autopsy done was denied. Garrison often pointed out that his key witnesses just kept dying. Marilyn Moon was another stripper at Jack Ruby's club. She was found shot to death on September 1, 1966. She was writing an inside knowledge book about the Kennedy assassination. And here's a woman named Beverly Oliver who says that indeed Jack Ruby and Lee Oswald knew each other.
I purposely have waited this long. I've always felt very threatened. You know, a lot of folks that gave testimony are no longer around to give testimony any longer. I didn't want to become a statistic. I didn't want to be one of those people that shot myself in the back of the head with a shotgun. One night in particular, I recall about 2 weeks prior to the assassination, being in the club. Parking lot separated his club, the Carousel, and the club that I worked at, the Colony Club. So in between shows, the showgirls from the Colony Club would go over to Jack's club and watch their show, and in their show breaks they would come and watch our show. So I had trotted over there that night and was watching the show, And there was a girl that danced there by the name of Jada. And she was sitting at the table with Jack Ruby and another man. And I went and sat down with them to have a drink. As I sat down at the table, Ruby introduced me to the man sitting there at the table with he and Jada. And he said, "Beverly, this is my friend, Lee." And after Jack Ruby went into the police station and killed Lee Harvey Oswald, it was then that I realized this was the man that I had met in the club 2 weeks prior to the assassination of Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby were linked together, and I don't know how, and probably I never will. But I know in my heart that man, Lee Harvey Oswald, or the person that was shot in the basement of the police station, was the man that was in the club 2 weeks prior to the assassination. As a matter of fact, the next day, Jada gave an interview to the newspaper, and she said the same thing that I'm saying to you now, that she met Oswald 2 weeks prior to the assassination of Kennedy. However, unfortunate it is, Jada is dead, or so they tell me.
Let's go back to the killing of Officer J.D. Tippit.
Hello, police operator. Go ahead. Go ahead. It says news. Hello, we've had a shooting out here. Where is it at? It says news and police radio. What location? Between Marsalis and Buckley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. What's it? 404 10th Street.
Lee Harvey Oswald was just 24 years old when he allegedly shot and killed President John F. Kennedy from a 6-story window in Dallas, Texas at 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963. And we're told that just 45 minutes after Oswald killed JFK, he also gunned down a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, 3 miles away in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas at 1:15 p.m. He also, between these events, stopped off at his residence where he was seen by his landlady. Then 1 mile from Oswald's residence, we're told he put 3 bullets in the chest of Officer Tippit. Then when Officer Tippit was lying on the ground, we're told that Oswald calmly walked up to Tippit and finished him off with a bullet to the head, then walked off calmly. Again, this was just 45 minutes after Oswald supposedly killed JFK. Supposedly shot JFK from a 6th-floor window in a big building. And 37 minutes after the shooting of Officer Tippit, Oswald was arrested at the Texas movie theater 7 blocks away. But there's a problem with the timeline. A witness, a man named Warren Butch Burroughs, who was both taking tickets and running the concession stand in the theater, says he saw Oswald at the theater at 1:05 or 1:07 p.m. He remembers the time clearly because he says the movie starts at 1 p.m. every day. Officer Tippit was shot at 1:15 p.m.
We were playing 2 movies called War as Hell with Dorothy Murphy and Cry Battle with Ben Hepplin. And we started the movie at 1 o'clock, and I was counting candy behind the candy case. And he also slipped in around between 1 and 1:07.
So if Oswald was in the theater at 1:05 or 1:07 p.m., he couldn't have been shooting Officer Tippit at 1:15 p.m. And the theater was 7 blocks away from where Officer J.D. Tippit was gunned down. So it would have taken at least 10 minutes to walk or jog to the theater from there. 2 days later, Oswald, while in police custody, was shot and killed by mafia underworld figure Jack Ruby in the basement of the police station, with 60 officers watching on. But there are yet more oddities. After Oswald was arrested in the theater, Butch Burroughs, who was taking tickets and selling the snacks, was astounded to see a second Oswald walking around. This second Oswald looked like a twin brother. Butch said that one Oswald was taken out the front door of the theater by police, while the other Oswald was taken out the back. And another witness, Bernard Hare, also saw a second Oswald. Bernard Hare owned a hobby shop next to the theater. He saw some commotion on the street, then went to the back of the store where there's an alley. There he saw Oswald taken by police out the back of the theater and put in a police car back there. But the official report says that Oswald was taken out the front of the theater by police. But Mr. Hare says this is wrong. Oswald was taken out of the back of the theater by police. So we have one Oswald being taken out of the front of the theater by police and another Oswald being taken out of the back of the theater by police. Both Burrow and Hare say there were two Oswalds, as does police officer J.D. Stringfellow. Stringfellow says Oswald was arrested on the balcony of the theater, but he wasn't. Oswald was arrested in the main bottom part of the theater. So who did Officer Stringfellow see being arrested? And yet a third Oswald was seen by an auto mechanic named T.F. White. This Oswald was walking around outside at 2 p.m., while the other two Oswalds were supposedly under arrest. T.F. White saw this Oswald get into a red Falcon automobile and speed off. White did not know who this Oswald was at the time he saw him on the street. He recognized him later from TV. And the Oswald on TV who was in police custody looked identical to the Oswald who drove off in that red Falcon. But there's more. A U.S. Air Force sergeant named Robert Vinson says he found himself on a C-4 cargo plane with Lee Oswald on the afternoon of the JFK assassination. Was this a getaway plane? Now, Sergeant Robert G. Vinson was not just some nobody. He had crypto security clearance and was working for NORAD. He says he flew with Oswald out of Dallas on this apparent getaway plane on the afternoon of the killing of JFK.
On November 22nd, Staff Sergeant Robert Vinson was at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. He was hoping to hop a military flight back to his home base in Colorado.
The clerk told me, he said, "You see that C-54 out there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's going to Denver. Why don't you go get on it?"
At about that same time, President Kennedy was getting ready for a Dallas motorcade. But Air Force Sergeant Bob Vinson wasn't concerned with that. He just wanted to get back to his unit. On board the plane, he thought it odd that the pilot or co-pilot didn't speak to him. There was also no crew chief on board, and at that time almost all Air Force flights had a crew chief. Plus, the tail designation was odd. It wasn't a normal Air Force insignia. As Vinson winged his way towards Denver, the presidential motorcade in Dallas was underway.
At 12:29, the pilot came on the loudspeaker and said,
President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed.
And he did a complete 180, headed south.
Dallas was their destination, not an airport, but a dirt strip which may have been an interstate road under construction.
We came in real low, and he came in pretty hot, or pretty fast. We landed, never did shut the engines off. Pretty soon the co-pilot came back, unlatched the door, did not say anything to me. Two people boarded the aircraft. They were in beige-type coveralls. They walked to the front of it and sat down right behind the cockpit. They didn't speak to me or say anything to me.
Nor did the two men acknowledge the pilot or co-pilot. They just sat there. One was Cuban or Latino. The other was Caucasian. They were only on the ground for 5 minutes. The plane then landed at an Air Force base in New Mexico, a base that was on full alert.
They just jumped out whenever they landed. They just bailed out. As far as I was concerned, it was the most unusual flight I'd ever been on.
Over the next few months, Vinson was transferred to a new squadron, his background checked meticulously. His new assignment was a CIA unit. Both he and his wife were sworn to secrecy.
I feel that there is a connection. My wife feels there's a connection.
And those unusual markings on the tail of the aircraft that Vinson took to Dallas, he later found they indicated the plane belonged to the CIA.
And you can read about that in this book here, Flight from Dallas, New Evidence of CIA Involvement in the Murder of President John F. Kennedy. Now, is this other Oswald, this third Oswald, was this the same Oswald who was seen by Howard L. Brennan shooting from the 6th floor of the Book Depository building? And who was Howard L. Brennan? Well, Howard L. Brennan was the most important witness of the Warren Commission report. Without Brennan, they had nothing. But Brennan was pretty far away when he saw someone who looked like Oswald shooting from the 6th floor of the book depository. He saw this from across the street. The depository building is on Houston Street, the corner of Houston and Elm. Brennan was across the intersection on Elm Street. But Oswald at that time was seen by Carolyn Arnold relaxed, having lunch on the 1st floor 10 minutes before the shooting. And then 95 seconds after the shooting, he was seen on the 2nd floor enjoying a Coca-Cola, perfectly relaxed, by Officer Marion Baker and building manager Roy Truly. And he had gotten change for his $1 from Mrs. Reed to get his Coca-Cola on the 2nd floor. And wouldn't Oswald at least be sweating and breathing hard if he had just sprinted up 6 flights of stairs from the lunch area to get his rifle and fire 3 shots, kill the President of the United States, wipe down his rifle for prints, hide it, run down 4 flights of stairs, get his Coca-Cola, and not be sweating, breathing hard, excited, nervous, or fidgety in the least?
Mrs. Walther says that she saw 2 men with a gun in the book depository.
I looked at this building and I saw this man with the gun, and there was another man standing to his right, and I could not see all of this man, and I couldn't see his face. And the other man was holding a short gun. It wasn't as long as a rifle.
It should be noted here that the commission failed to follow up Mrs. Walther's story. She was interviewed briefly by FBI agents, but never called before the commission or its staff.
And the mystery of the many Oswalds has been a topic of intrigue for many JFK so-called conspiracy theorists like me. And here are some more additional Oswalds. We're told that Lee Harvey Oswald was in Mexico City visiting the Russian and Cuban embassies from September 26 to October 2nd, 1963. This story was part of the framing of Oswald by the CIA. But the problem is that Lee Oswald was also said to be at a shooting range, unloading his ammunition at other people's targets, making a loud spectacle of himself, acting crazy, and making sure that everyone at the range knew that he was Lee Harvey Oswald. So this event at the shooting range, at the practice range, was also part of the framing of Lee Oswald. On March 12, 1963, we're also told that Oswald went to one post office in Dallas and bought a money order, then went to another post office and mailed the money order to Klein's Sporting Goods to order his rifle and pistol. This rifle he supposedly shot JFK with. The problem is post offices are open from 8 to 5. Oswald was at work from 8 to 5. At that time at the Jaggers, Childs, and Stovall Mapping Company. Jaggers, Childs, and Stovall, it turns out, was a CIA topographical mapping company that was producing top-secret maps, surveillance maps, of Cuba and the Soviet Union for the U.S. Army. Oswald also supposedly used the alias Alex Hidell to buy the rifle. Now, conveniently, a wallet was found at the scene of the murder of Officer Tippit that contained an ID for Lee Oswald and Alex J. Hidell. This is strange because the Lee Oswald who was arrested in the theater had his wallet. He had not left his wallet at the scene of any crime. So this becomes the mystery of the 2 wallets.
All squad. Attention all squad.
The wallet. A persistent mystery.
Sit down. This is Ron Ryland. You can imagine the confusion that's going on in the city of Dallas today.
The mysterious wallet first appeared on WFAA that afternoon.
Let's roll the film and we'll narrate it as we go.
A Channel 8 photographer showed it and presumed it was Officer Tippit's. A half hour east of Birmingham, in Pell City, Alabama, is the only man alive today who saw Oswald's wallet at Tippit's murder.
As I walked up, not knowingly stepped in a puddle of blood, which was Tippit's blood.
Bob Barrett spent 27 years as an FBI agent and was sent to investigate the Tippit murder that day, where he recognized a Dallas police captain thumbing through a billfold.
He said, Bob, you know all the crooks in town, all the hoodlums, etc. You ever heard of Lee Harvey Oswald? And I said, no, I never have. He said, how about Alex Hidell? I said, no, I never had heard of him either. Why would they be asking me questions about Oswald and Hidell if it wasn't in that wallet?
In fact, the first Dallas cop on the scene said he actually recovered the wallet.
And this is the only written account.
Sergeant Kenneth Croy, a reserve officer, put it in writing on an 8x10 for Rookstool.
First on the scene, recovered Oswald's wallet there too.
But officially, Dallas police told a different story. Said they got it from Oswald himself after his arrest.
And who is Alex Hidell? An FBI agent, James Hosty, discussed the mystery of the two wallets in his 1995 book, Assignment Oswald. Turns out Alex Hidell had been an alias used by other undercover intelligence agents. It's also very convenient when they find the wallet of the man that they are trying to frame at the scene of the murder. It's a bit too on the nose when the killer drops his wallet with his ID in it at the murder scene. And plus, Oswald had his wallet when he was arrested at the theater. What was Officer J.D. Tippit doing right before he was killed? Well, he was behaving very erratically. When Tippit was shot and killed, he was the only police officer in the vicinity, and he was not where he was supposed to be. All or almost all Dallas police were summoned to Dealey Plaza, where JFK had just been killed 45 minutes earlier. And Tippit was 6 miles from his regular patrol district, number 78. He was gunned down in District 91. And that morning, Tippit, perhaps significantly, hugged his oldest son, Alan, and told him, quote, "No matter what happens today, I want you to know I love you," end quote. And Tippit was behaving very erratically during the period just before he was killed. 5 witnesses placed Tippit not near the address where he was killed, but at this Glauco gas station between 12:45 and 1 p.m., or about 20 minutes after the assassination of JFK. The folks at this gas station knew Officer Tippit. He was seen here by A.I. Volklin and his wife Lou, who waved to Officer Tippit. Tippit was sitting in his patrol car. Tippit was also seen at this gas station by Tim Mullins, Emmett Hollingshead, and J.B. Shorty Lewis between 12:45 and 1 p.m. Tippit then suddenly sped off at a high rate of speed. At 1 p.m., Tippit arrived and parked his car on Bishop Street and entered this record store, Top 10 Records, at 338 West Jefferson Boulevard. Tippit was very much in a hurry. He asked to use the phone, and he pushed people out of his way, so he could use the phone. This is according to 18-year-old Luis Cortines, who was behind the counter. Tippit dialed the number. It rang 7 or 8 times. No one answered. Tippit hung up, looked very upset. He left and drove away at a high rate of speed. He ran a stop sign. Next, Tippit is seen in Oak Cliff, which is an area of Dallas. He's seen there by James Andrews a bit after 1 p.m. Andrews, an insurance man, was driving on 10th Street when Tippit came up quickly behind him, passed Andrews, cut in front of Andrews' car, and forced Andrews to stop. Tippit then jumped out of his patrol car, ran back to Andrews' car, frantically looked in the back seat of Andrews' car, and without saying a word, Tippit then went back to his car and sped off at a high rate of speed. Andrews says he knew it was Tippit because he saw Tippit's nameplate. Andrews said that Tippit appeared to be very upset and was just acting wild, acting like a crazed madman. And then Officer was shot 4 times and killed in a place where he wasn't supposed to be. So let's hear from one of the witnesses to the shooting of Officer Tippit. Let's hear what a housekeeper named Aquila Clemens has to say.
Mrs. Clemens, where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
Just down the block from where Tippit was killed.
Did you know Officer Tippit?
Yes, I saw him pretty many times.
And did you hear the shots?
Yes, I heard the shots.
And what did you do?
I ran out into the street and looked down the street, and I ran back down the street where he was lying, and I looked at him.
Now, when you heard the shots and you went out of the house, did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He's kind of heavy. He wasn't a very big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he's kind of short guy.
Short and heavy?
Yes.
And was there any other man there?
Yes, there was one on the other side of the street. All I know, he told him to go.
Mrs. Clemens, the man who had the gun, did he make any motion at all to the other man across the street?
No more told him to go.
Well, he waved his hand and said, go on? And then what happened with the man with the gun?
He unloaded and reloaded.
And what did the other man do?
Man kept going straight down the street.
And then did they go in opposite directions?
Yes, they were. They weren't together. They went this way from each other. The one done the shooting went this way. The other went straight down past street that way.
What was the man who did not do the shooting, but the man who went in the other direction from the man with the gun? What was he wearing, if you remember?
Well, first I can remember he looked like light khakis and a white shirt.
And was he tall or short?
He was tall.
And was he heavy or thin?
He was thin.
But the one who had the gun, seconds after Tippit was shot, he was short.
Yes, he was short and kind of heavy.
Oh, so the man with the gun was short and heavy. Looked nothing like Oswald. Some say he sounds like Jack Ruby. Oswald was 5'9", 135 pounds. And the guy across the street she sees, she describes as tall and thin in a white T-shirt. But when Oswald was arrested in that movie theater 7 blocks away, he was wearing a beige-colored windbreaker, a long-sleeved brownish-patterned woven shirt with a button-down front, and button wrist cuffs. Here's another witness to Officer Tippit's murder, named Helen Markham.
Well, this man was walking along the sidewalk on 10th Street. This police car was driving very slow down 10th Street.
And what happened?
Well, the man kept walking, that's like I say, with his hands down in his head. I didn't pay him no mind, I didn't care. And this police car kept coming on, and finally he stopped, and the man stopped. And whether the policeman say, come over to the car, talk to him, I don't know, but he went.
Was he on the driver's side or on the other side?
On the other side.
And did he stick his head in the window?
Yes, sir. He folded his hands like this. He put them in through the window, up on the window, and he leaned over like this.
What do you remember about this man? Was he a big man or a small man?
No, he wasn't a very big man. He was short, kind of short, so as I remember.
Well, now, was he still standing there when Officer Tippit got out of the police car?
Well, he got out of the window, put his hands back down to his side, and stepped back 2 steps. The policeman calmly opened the door. He calmly crawled out. And for me, I didn't pay no attention because I was, talk, friendly. And the policeman got to the front wheel on the driver's side, and this man shot him in the wink of your eyes. Just bang, bang, bang.
And what did this man who had shot the officer, what did he do as soon as he had shot him? Did he move back or did he run or what?
No, he didn't break out and run fast. He walked fast down the sidewalk, back towards me, and then he seen me. And then he done like this. And of course I did too, and then I slapped my hands upon my face. But I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. What would I do?
Did he say anything at all to you?
He did not. So I can tell you, I closed my eyes, and my hands right there, and then I stayed there a few minutes. And I was going to look and see if he's gone or coming after me or what. And I opened my fingers, and I looked, and he was trotting off down across this lot up here. And he wasn't even out of sight. He saw me go to the policeman. Now, he could have killed me, too. I knew I had to get help for this man. And I knew this police car, all police cars got radios in them. And I'll do what I can to get help for this man. And I tried.
So the man she described also did not look like Oswald. She describes him as short. Oswald was 5'9". 5'9" is not short, especially for that day. Average height for a man in 1963 was 5'8", so sure it would be 5'5", 5'4", something like that. And Oswald was 4 inches taller than Helen Markham, who was 5'5". So she would not be describing somebody who was 5'9" as short.
He was short, kind of short, so as I remember.
Also striking is that Officer Tippit and this man talked calmly with each other for quite a while, seemed to know each other. The gunman had his hands folded, was leaning on the lower window frame of the car.
And did he stick his head in the window?
Yes, sir. He folded his hands like this. He put them in through the window, up on the window, and he leaned over like this.
And was talking with Officer Tippit while Officer Tippit was in the car talking back at this person. Then after talking for a while, Tippit gets out of his car, walks toward this man, but isn't running toward this man. Tippit isn't pulling his gun, isn't telling the man to freeze, put his hand on the hood of the car or anything like that. Everything still seems to be calm and relaxed, again like they knew each other. Then the man pulls a gun out and shoots Tippit 3 times in the chest, then calmly walks up to Tippit while Tippit is on the ground and puts a bullet in Tippit's head. So this is a professional execution-style murder, not the act of a desperate fugitive who had just shot the president. Now, I have no theories about Officer Tippit. Was this a drug deal gone bad? Did he owe the mob money? Was he lured to this location as part of the plot to frame Oswald? I have no idea. Now, the Warren Commission says there were 12 witnesses to the Tippit murder, but the only witness they actually use is Helen Markham, and she described a short man.
He was short, kind of short, so I remember.
On another occasion, in an interview with a journalist, an attorney named Mark Lane, one of the top scholars of the JFK assassination, she tells Lane that the man she saw was short, heavy, and with bushy hair. Now, conspiracy deniers will say that Mrs. Markham picked Oswald out of a police lineup. So let's focus on that. Let's look at her transcript from her amazing testimony before the Warren Commission. And keep in mind that the Warren Commission interviews and testimony occurred behind closed doors, out of public view. So all we have is transcripts and written accounts. And a substantial number of Warren Commission witnesses say their testimony was altered. The transcription saying the exact opposite of what the witnesses had actually said. That's what many witnesses say. And keep in mind that Helen Markham, in the view of the Warren Commission, was the best witness that they had from their perspective on the murder of Officer Tippit. The Warren Commission did not include any testimony from the other 11 witnesses they said they had. So let's look at this transcript here. Helen Markham's questioner here was Warren Commission counsel Joseph Ball. First, Markham told the panel that she could not pick Oswald out of a police lineup. She said that the killer's coat didn't match Oswald's gray jacket, and that the killer's shirt didn't look like the shirt Oswald had on either. Here's the transcript. Mr. Ball, now when you went into this room, you looked these 4 people over, these 4 men? Mrs. Markham, yes, sir. Mr. Ball, did you recognize anyone in the lineup? Mrs. Markham, no, sir. Mr. Ball, you didn't see anybody? I have asked you that question before. Did you recognize anyone from their face? Miss Markham, from their face? No. Mr. Ball, did you identify anybody in these 4 people? Mrs. Markham, I didn't know nobody. Mr. Ball, I know you didn't know anybody, but did anybody in that lineup look like anybody you had seen before? Mrs. Markham, no, I had never seen none of them. None of these men. Mr. Ball, not one of the 4? Mrs. Markham, no, not one of them. Mr. Ball, not one of all 4? Mrs. Markham, no, sir. So this testimony is not going well at all for the Warren Commission. But let's continue. Mr. Ball, who were you in the lineup room with? Mrs. Markham, policeman. Mr. Ball, more than one? Mrs. Markham, the room was full. The room was full of policemen watching her do this. Mr. Ball, was there a number 2 man in there? Mrs. Markham, number 2 is the one I picked. Mr. Ball, well, I thought you told me that you hadn't. Mrs. Markham, well, let me tell you, I said the second man, and they kept asking me which one. I said number 2 when they said 2, and when I said number 2, I just got weak. So that's her testimony. She says the room was full of police. They brought out 4 men, including Oswald. After constantly badgering Markham to pick someone out and then guiding her to pick number 2, she finally picked number 2 because she said she was weak. And this was the Warren Commission's best witness. Here's more testimony from Miss Markham to the Warren Commission. Mr. Ball, I have here an exhibit, Commission Exhibit 162, a jacket. Did you ever see this before? Mrs. Markham, no, I did not. Mr. Ball, does it look like anything like the jacket that the man had on? Miss Markham, no, it was darker than that. I know it was. Mr. Ball, I show you a shirt here, which is Exhibit 150. Did you ever see a shirt the color of this? Mrs. Markham, the shirt that this man had, it was a lighter looking shirt than that. Mr. Ball, the man who shot Tippit? Mrs. Markham, yes, sir. So not only did Oswald's light beige jacket not look like the jacket worn by Tippit's killer, but Oswald's shirt was darker than the killer's shirt. What kind of identification is this? And why would police only put 4 men in a police lineup? Here's the lineup right here. A police lineup usually has at least 6 people. Plus, in this lineup, they had Oswald dressed in a white t-shirt. 2 others had on nice business suits, another a nice collared shirt. Everyone had seen Oswald on the news in this white t-shirt, including Mrs. Markham. So Oswald stood out like a sore thumb in this police lineup. Oswald was clearly the one that the police wanted her to pick, even though she kept saying no one in this lineup looked anything like the shooter. She just picked Oswald because she said she was weak. That's what she told the commission. And the room full of police broke out in applause, cheering, when she finally picked Oswald. It's almost like she was trying to tell the truth to the commission without angering Mr. Ball, the commission's counsel, and getting herself in trouble, without getting herself killed. So after Miss Markham's disastrous testimony to the commission, that is disastrous from the perspective of those trying to frame Oswald, Mr. Joseph Ball characterized Miss Markham as an utter screwball. And again, this was the Warren Commission's best witness to the shooting of Officer Tippit. The Warren Commission did not use the other 11 witnesses they said they had. The Warren Commission report hardly talks about the shooting of Officer Tippit because they know the official narrative that Oswald killed Officer Tippit just doesn't hold up to even surface-level scrutiny. Had Oswald not been gunned down by Jack Ruby, Oswald would have been acquitted by a jury for both the JFK and Officer Tippit killings. And Miss Markham's description of the shooter to investigative journalist Mark Lane lines up perfectly with Miss Clemens' description, short and on the heavy side. Again, let's review Miss Clemens' description of Officer Tippit's killer.
Now, when you heard the shots and you went out of the house, did you see a man with a gun?
Yes, I did.
What was he doing?
Oh, he was reloading it. When I said he was reloading his gun.
And how would you describe that man?
Well, he's kind of chunky. He's kind of heavy. He wasn't a great big man.
Was he tall or short?
Yeah, he's kind of short guy.
Short and heavy.
Yeah.
And it's significant that Miss Clemens was threatened, told to stay quiet, not say anything about what she saw to anyone.
Now, did you testify before the Warren Commission about this case?
I haven't said anything to anyone.
Did anyone come to see you after the murder of Officer Tippit?
Yes, he was a man came, I don't know what he was. He came to my house and talked to me. But I don't know what he looked like a policeman to me.
He did. Did he have a gun?
Yes, he wore a gun.
Mrs. Clemens, how long after Tippit was shot did this man with a gun come to visit you?
About 2 days. It was about 2 days. Said that I might get hurt. Someone might hurt me if I would talk.
About what you saw?
What I saw. He just told me to be the best if I didn't say anything because I might get hurt.
And told her that she might get hurt if she talked about what she saw. But also the bullets found at the scene of Officer Tippit's killing did not match the kind of bullet fired by Oswald's Smith & Wesson Victory Model 38 caliber special revolver. The casings covered at the Tippit murder scene were fired by an automatic.
After the shooting, police found shells at the scene. They went on the radio and said they were 38 automatics. Later, Oswald's arrested with a revolver that fires 38 specials, a shell that's clearly about a 1/4 inch longer. Besides, they're clearly stamped on the bottom. One says 38 special, one says 38 automatic.
Also, there were 2 different kinds of shell casings found at Officer Tippit's shooting, indicating 2 guns. It would also be difficult, if not impossible, to squeeze off 3 rapid-fire shots with a revolver, as Mrs. Markham described in this execution. An automatic or semi-automatic pistol would be needed to do this. Pulling a trigger on a revolver requires quite a bit of force, which is why women usually have to cock back the hammer on a revolver for each shot. A semi-automatic allows for rapid firing. Oswald's revolver was also reported to be inoperable, didn't work. He carried it because he lived in a rough neighborhood and he wanted to be able to scare off would-be attackers or robbers. The official narrative that Lee Oswald murdered Officer Tippit just doesn't stand up on any level. No aspect of it even holds up to a casual review of the facts. It's also worth touching on the curious photo of Oswald on the cover of Life magazine that was all over the media in February of 1964. This photo allegedly shows Oswald with the rifle he supposedly used to kill JFK. When Oswald was presented with this photo the day after JFK was killed, he instantly said it was a fake. He said that's just his face pasted on somebody else's body to frame him. He said that's not his body. And here's what Stephen Jaffe says, Jaffe being a photography analyst for District Attorney Jim Garrison.
Whoever framed Oswald evidently used only one picture of his face and planted it on someone else's body. Then to give the face on the right a different look, it seems they airbrushed some of the facial features and tilted the head slightly, and in doing so, they tilted the shadow under his nose. That it was one face is easily demonstrated. If you take the face on the right and superimpose it over the face on the left, the features line up. But when you slide the face back, you see that it had to be tilted. The second and more obvious proof is with the position of the bodies. The body on the right seems to be closer to the camera. If so, the head should be larger. However, you can see when you slide it over the face on the left, the faces are the same size. This means the bodies should be the same height. They are not.
So as you can see here, the head is exactly the same head, exactly the same size, but the bodies are different sizes. Also, the finding of this photo just 24 hours after JFK's killing just seems a bit too on the nose from a propaganda standpoint. Oswald standing there with this rifle holding Marxist publications. Just seems a bit too convenient. Fits the narrative too closely. Plus, years after the assassination, a backyard photo was found in Dallas Police Department files with a ghost cutout figure where Oswald should have been. It's also kind of convenient propaganda to have a shadow under Oswald's nose that looks kind of like a Hitler mustache. Now, I'm well aware of the so-called debunking of the fake Oswald photo thesis, the most famous being by this computer science professor at Dartmouth named Henry Farid.
This is a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald. It shows him carrying a gun, holstering a pistol, and you can't see what's on the newspaper, but he's holding these Marxist or communist newspapers. And the photograph was very damning. First of all, it showed that he had weapons, and it also sort of was further evidence of his communist sympathies at the time. And if this photograph is fake, it would almost certainly point to a broader conspiracy because it means the police doctored a photograph to try to spin a story. And the thing that has people really bothered about this photograph primarily is the lighting and the shadows. So if you look at the cast shadow by his body, you see it going back and to his right, which would suggest that the light is sort of relatively low, because it's a long shadow, and off to his left. That would sort of give rise to that. Now what I'm showing you here is a magnified view of his face, and you see this very long shadow being cast by his nose, and that would suggest that the light is above him. And I have to say, when I first looked at this, it seemed weird to me. I'm like, well, how did that happen? So I thought, wow, I wonder if this is really a fake image. Now, at the same time, we had been doing a study to try to understand the limitations of the visual system in reasoning about shadows and lighting and 3D geometry. And it turns out we are spectacularly bad at it. I mean, really, it's unbelievable how bad we are. So I was able to temper my suspicions a little bit with an understanding that my brain just isn't very good at this. So I wanted to really not just do a qualitative study. I really wanted to sort of get at this in a very quantitative and mathematical way. And fortunately, there's just now enough technology that we were able to go back and look at this photograph from 1963 to try to answer this question. If we're interested in reasoning about shadows, the first thing we have to realize is that everything here is happening in a three-dimensional world. We're looking at a two-dimensional image, but everything here happened in the world. And if we want to recreate this, we need 3D models of everything so we can figure out, well, if I put the light here, the camera here, the person here, where does all the light go? So we have to build 3D models. And my favorite part, which is on the neck, you see the shadow cutting in exactly like you have here. So everything in this photograph is exactly consistent. So you can build a quantitative three-dimensional model of the scene, of the person, of the head, figure out where the camera or the light was, reconstruct, and everything is perfect. It's almost certainly the case that the reason why people think this is a fake is simply a failing of the visual system to reason about 3D lighting and 3D geometry. Because in fact, when you do the reconstruction, everything is 100% perfect.
I did not find Professor Farid's debunking convincing at all. His debunking centered around the claim by conspiracy theorists that the shadows and lighting are wrong in the Life magazine photo, for this photo to be real. Professor Fareed then constructs a computer model to say that a genuine photo might produce these shadows and this kind of lighting. And anyone who has listened to me for any length of time knows what I think of models. Models just show what the modeler wants to show. Garbage in, garbage out. And if there are more than two variables, the possibilities become infinite, become impossible to model accurately. How many variables are there with lighting and shadows? Well, you have the sun, you have reflections of the sun off windows and surfaces, and you have clouds, time of day, and angles. Nothing whatsoever can be learned from Fareed's model in terms of lighting and shadows. Even Fareed himself says nothing can be learned from analyzing lighting and shadows. That's sort of his point. Yet he says the photo is genuine because the lighting and shadows in it are possible. What Stephen Jaffe says looks more on the money to me.
Whoever framed Oswald evidently used only one picture of his face and planted it on someone else's body. That it was one face is easily demonstrated. If you take the face on the right and superimpose it over the face on the left, the features line up. But when you slide the face back, you see that it had to be tilted. The second and more obvious proof is with the position of the bodies. The body on the right seems to be closer to the camera. If so, the head should be larger. However, you can see when you slide it over the face on the left, the faces are the same size. This means the bodies should be the same height. They are not.
Same face, different size bodies. And one body doesn't look much like the other body. One body, the one on the right, looks shorter and thicker. Also, just assume that any study put out by an elite college or university to support the government's propaganda line was probably paid for in some way, directly or indirectly by the government. All these elite colleges and universities are heavily supported by the government, by the taxpayer. And they constantly put out fake studies to support whatever narrative the government wants to put out there. Tell me what the financial incentives are, and I'll tell you what the outcome will be. Let's go back to Dealey Plaza, the scene of the JFK killing, to learn more about whether the official account makes any sense at all. The official line is that 3 shots, and 3 shots only, were fired from the 6th floor of the depository building behind JFK. So if JFK was struck by that bullet from the front, as the film and other evidence clearly shows, where was the other bullet or the other bullets fired from? Well, the CIA probably had snipers positioned in many locations. They were not going to miss this time. They had missed in Chicago 3 weeks earlier. They had missed in Tampa 4 days earlier. And they missed in Miami earlier that month. They will make sure they don't miss in Dallas. Well, dozens of witnesses heard shots coming from the top of this hill right here, often called the Grassy Knoll, next to this triple overpass.
As the news spread and the nation reeled, the hunt began for a killer. Some witnesses pointed toward a rise in Dealey Plaza next to the motorcade route, the Grassy Knoll, and rushed there, along with police from the motorcade.
Here's what railroad worker Leon Simmons had to say.
As the presidential limousine was rounding the curve on Elm Street, there was a loud explosion. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot. And it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees on the embankment. I was talking with a patrolman Foster at the time, and as soon as we heard the shots, we ran around to the wooden fence. And when we got there, there was no one there, but there was footprints in the mud around the fence, and there was footprints on the wooden 2x4 railing on the fence.
Were you questioned by the Dallas police on that day?
Yes, I was.
Did you give your name to the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell them what you've just told me?
Yes, I did.
Were you subsequently questioned by agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
About a month later, I was questioned by the FBI.
Did you tell them what you told me and what you told the Dallas police?
Yes, I did.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir, I wasn't.
Here's what another witness on the overpass says, Richard Dodd, also a railroad worker.
Where were you on November 22nd, Mr. Todd?
I was standing on the underpass, Commerce Underpass in Dallas, Texas.
Were you there alone?
No, I was along with 3 friends of mine.
Railroad men?
Yeah, all railroad men.
Mr. Holland was one of them.
That's right.
And did you see anything which might indicate to you where the shots came from?
Well, we all 3 seen about the same thing as the shots. The smoke came from behind the hedge.
And here's what their supervisor says, Sam Holland.
And I saw a puff of smoke still lingering underneath the trees in front of the wooden fence.
Is this the exact spot you were standing on November 22nd, Mr. Holland?
That's correct. This is the exact spot that I was standing November the 22nd, waiting for the parade.
And where did you hear that third shot come from?
Right over about 20 or 30 feet from the other end of that little picket fence.
And where was the smoke that you saw?
It drifted right out underneath those green trees, those 2 trees.
From behind the fence?
From behind the fence. It kind of hung there just like for a few seconds, long enough that you could see that it was
and then what
puff of smoke.
And then what'd you do?
Immediately after the president's car came underneath this overpass, a 4 of us broke a run around this fence to find out if we could see anybody leaving the area.
Again, he confirms that the shot came from the top of the grassy knoll, from behind the fence. So that would be a perfect vantage point for the assassin. He would be concealed, would have a clear shot, and an easy escape route. Austin Miller saw smoke in the area of the trees at the top of the grassy knoll. Royce Skelton says he heard 4 shots. 2 shots hit the pavement. Electrician Frank Riley heard 3 shots from the trees. They all heard what they thought was firecrackers at first. They saw smoke, all heard 3 or more shots. These accounts are all very precise, all basically the same. The Warren Commission ignored or discounted all of these witnesses. Another witness was Julia Ann Mercer. She says she saw Jack Ruby in a pickup truck giving guns to someone on the grassy knoll. This is her statement to the Dallas Sheriff's Department.
Julia Ann Mercer was driving through Dealey Plaza on the morning of November 22nd. She was alone, driving west towards the Triple Underpass. As she approached the underpass, she was stopped by a green truck at the side of the road. While she waited for traffic to clear, she saw a man take a gun case from the back of the truck and proceed up the hill toward the grassy knoll. She described the man as white, about 20 to 30 years old, a gray jacket, brown pants, and a plaid shirt. In describing the driver, the affidavit said he was white, in his 40s, heavy set, in a green jacket. In a meeting with the FBI on November 22nd, Mercer was shown photographs. When the agent turned over the picture she had chosen, she saw the name Jack Ruby. On November 27th, she was once more shown a series of photographs, and again, she picked out Jack Ruby.
The Warren Commission never called her to testify, just didn't fit the narrative. Officer J.W. Foster saw a bullet strike on the south side of Elm Street near a manhole cover. Here's the .45 caliber bullet. And here's Officer Ed Brewer kneeling by the manhole cover. Here's what Edna Hardman has to say about this.
And when we got down there near this cover, we were standing near it, and I looked down.
Manhole cover?
Manhole cover, and I saw this piece of dirt raised up like a ground mole would, but it didn't go down. It went across the ground, under it. And I bent over, and I traced it for several foot back, and a policeman appeared and traced it with me, and I said, "What in the world is this? It's like a ground mole hole, but I've never seen one so long." And he says, "That's where a bullet went through."
And Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters finds something in the grass. He's with this mysterious blonde fellow in the suit. The blonde man picks up the object, looks at it. The blonde man puts it in his pocket. Probably another bullet. Deputy Sheriff Walters later denies finding anything there. All knowledge of this bullet was then denied by the FBI and the police. James Tague stood on Commerce Street at the Triple Underpass when the shooting started. A bullet hit the curbstone. He then felt a sting on his cheek when he was either hit by a piece of concrete or by a bullet fragment. Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters says he saw blood on Mr. Tague's cheek.
It wasn't but about 30 seconds till the presidential motorcade
rounded the corner of Main Street to turn over onto Elm. But right after the presidential car had turned the corner, I heard these three loud noises when I jumped behind the concrete abutment, which is between Main and Commerce. There was a motorcycle policeman that just stopped his motorcycle up by the monument and had drawn his revolver and was racing up the hill to the left of me. There was a deputy sheriff, which I think was stationed under the underpass, Buddy Walters. At this time, I says, you know, I felt something sting me on the face as I was standing down there. I said, just sting, and Walters looked at me and says, yes, says, you got blood on your cheek. He says, where were you standing? I says, well, down by the underpass. So we started walking down there, and when Walters got about, well, I'd say 10 feet away, he says, look there on the curb, there was a very visible mark on the curb where a bullet had struck. Either a fragment of the bullet or a piece of the concrete. It flew up and scratched my face. And he said, go to the city police headquarters and make a statement, which I did.
Mr. Tagg, this is a picture of Dealey Plaza, as you know. I wonder if you'd be good enough to show me where you were standing when you heard the shots.
I was standing at the east end of the triple underpass between Commerce and Main. There's a little concrete divider there. It's about 3 feet wide.
And, sir, could you indicate where the bullet struck the concrete curb?
The bullet struck the curb on the south curb of Main Street. It would be right here.
And at the time that you first heard the shots, what was your impression as to the origin of those shots?
My first impression was that they had come from the left of me.
Would you indicate on the picture where that would be?
Up in this area here towards the hill.
Where in relation to that wooden fence?
Well, somewhere towards the wooden fence.
And Deputy Sheriff Walters writes in his report that he finds a fresh mark that appears to be a bullet mark in the curbstone on Main Street. Police Officer Clyde Haygood also notes the mark that appears to be a bullet mark in the curbstone. Here are photos of the mark in the curbstone taken by press photographers Dillard and Underwood. The Warren Commission ignored these two bullets. And here's the curbstone with a bullet damage being carried away. We never hear again about this section of curb. What did they find? Or were they just trying to remove and hide evidence? So this seems to be at least 2, maybe 3 more bullets that were not included in the Warren Commission report. There's so much at the scene at Dealey Plaza that's odd. For example, what was this guy doing with an open black umbrella on a bright sunny day, right exactly at the site, at the mark where JFK was killed? No one else in the crowd had umbrellas or rain gear. It was a bright sunny day. So very odd.
And then I noticed in all of Dallas, there appears to be exactly one person standing under an open black umbrella. Let us call him the Umbrella Man. There are other still photographs taken from other locations in Dealey Plaza which show the whole man standing under an open black umbrella. The only person under any umbrella in all of Dallas standing right at the location where all the shots come into the limousine.
Was he marking the spot where JFK would be? Was this some kind of signal? But what about the big bag that Oswald supposedly carried into the book depository building that we're told contained the rifle? So that looks pretty suspicious. And this is probably the most important piece of evidence that the police had against Oswald. So let's talk about that a bit. And this is a story that comes from a fellow named Buell Wesley Fraser.
Right home with me that afternoon. And I said, well, yes. And I said, well, why are you going home this afternoon? And he replied that he wanted to go home and pick up some curtain rods where he could put some curtains up in his apartment. And I said, oh, very well. And then I said, well, will you be going home with me tomorrow also? And he said no. He said he wouldn't be going home with me on the 22nd.
So he told you that he wanted to come out there and pick up some curtain rods, and this was on Thursday morning?
Yes.
And at that time, he told you that he would not ride home with you Friday night?
Right.
And this story is backed up by his sister, Lennie Mae, who says she also saw Oswald carrying this bag, this brown bag that was about 2.5 feet long.
About 7:10 a.m. in the morning, I was preparing lunches. I looked out the window and saw a man, whom I learned later was Mr. Oswald, crossing the street with a package approximately 2.5 feet long. He proceeded across my carport, and I opened the door to see where he was going and saw him put the package into my brother's car.
I went out the back door. Lee was standing just outside the door. We walked to the car. As we were getting in the car, I saw the package, and I said, "What's the package, Lee?" And Lee said, "Curtain rods." And the only comment that was made on the way to work was about the babies and the weather. And I always managed to get some comment out of him about the children, because I say he seemed like he's very fond of them. And I asked him, did he have fun playing with the babies? And he says, "Oh yeah," and kind of chuckled to himself. Got out of the car, see, and picked up the package while I was charging my battery, see. The battery ain't charging pretty bad. And then when I got out of the car and fixed the shut door, he started walking a little bit faster, and he finally got about 50 feet ahead of me.
So let's look at this story. Both Wesley Fraser and Oswald were working at the Book Depository building. Oswald was having marriage problems with Marina. She was living with their 2 babies at the home of Ruth and Michael Payne, who were both working for the CIA. Oswald was living in a rooming house in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas, about 2 miles from the Book Depository building. And Wesley Fraser lived in a house right next to Ruth and Michael Payne. Notice how convenient all that is. Oswald did not drive. So every Friday, Oswald would get a ride from Wesley Fraser, from the Book Depository building where they both worked, to Irving, Texas, where Marina was living with their 2 babies at Ruth and Michael Payne's house, the 2 CIA operatives. In fact, she was the one who helped Oswald get his job at the Book Depository building 5 weeks earlier. He would stay at the Payne house for the weekend, then get a ride back with Fraser to the Book Depository building on Monday. Fraser, like Oswald, had only been working at the Book Depository building for about 2 months. He had gotten his job there a few weeks before Oswald. He also looks a lot like Oswald, and we'll see why that's important in a moment. Fraser lived right next door to Ruth and Michael Payne, conveniently. Fraser just moved up there from Huntsville, Texas, a couple of months before. Fraser also has a story very similar to Oswald, though Fraser is only 19 years old at this point. He would serve in the Army for 8 years, but after this. But here's a problem for the official narrative. The police say this rifle belongs to Wesley Fraser, and Wesley Fraser is arrested. He's accused of killing President Kennedy. He's considered the main suspect in the case. Now, the rifle probably doesn't belong to Fraser, but the police say it does. Fraser is then interrogated by Detective Guy Rose and others. Detective Guy Rose was the lead detective in the case. They interrogate Fraser and his sister. They put him through a lie detector test. Here's the police report on the interview. The police threaten Fraser with the electric chair for killing the President of the United States. They tell him they have Fraser's gun, the .303 British Enfield rifle, and they scare the crap out of this 19-year-old kid. So then this curtain rod bag story comes out of nowhere later. And by the way, this is the same Detective Guy Rose who was the topic of a movie called The Thin Blue Line, about how the Dallas Police Department was famous for planting evidence to frame innocent people. This movie, The Thin Blue Line, is specifically about the trial and conviction of Randall Dale Adams for the 1976 shooting of Dallas police officer Robert W. Wood. Randall Adams was sentenced to death, but it turned out he was framed for the murder by the Dallas police, and specifically by this detective, Guy Rose, and his conviction was overturned in 1989 because of new DNA evidence. This is the same Detective Guy Rose character interrogating Fraser. And the Dallas County Police were notorious for planting evidence to achieve quick convictions. Now, most of the time, the Dallas police believed they had the right guy. They just needed the evidence, which they would plant or manufacture. It's often just much easier to plant the evidence than to actually have the evidence. And this is how many metro police departments operate. And Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade, who was the DA at the time of the JFK killing, had 15 of his murder and rape cases overturned due to new DNA evidence proving their innocence. Most of them black folks. Thanks to the work of the Texas Innocence Project, more than 250 similar convictions in Dallas County are now under review. There was a culture of conviction in the Dallas Police Department at the time Oswald was arrested. Combine this with the fact that Oswald was being framed by the CIA. Back to Wesley Frazier. Interestingly, there's a report of a guy at a shooting range who claimed to be Oswald, who was shooting at other people's targets and making a spectacle of himself. He wanted to be sure that everybody there knew that he was Lee Harvey Oswald. But the name he signed in with at the shooting range was Frazier. And if you look at this guy, he sure looks a lot like Lee Oswald. I believe that Wesley Frazier was going to be their backup fall guy, their backup patsy. If it didn't work out for some reason with Oswald, they had Frazier. And after this, Frazier would go into the Army for 8 years. And he had a pretty similar history to Oswald in many ways. And think back to that would-be assassin in Chicago. They had this other guy, Valley, who also looked a lot like Oswald. He was going to be the fall guy in the plot to kill Kennedy in Chicago 3 weeks earlier, but that didn't work out. And the 3 Cuban gunmen escaped out of Chicago. Valley was arrested. And no one other than Wesley Frazier and his sister see Oswald with this big bag. And it wasn't that big, it was 27 inches long. There was, in fact, no rifle bag. This is not the actual rifle bag. This was a bag that was made up by the FBI as an example of what the bag might look like. And it's the evidence used by the Warren Commission in its report, because they didn't actually have the bag. There also had to be a corroborating witness. It wouldn't be good if they just had one witness, so they got Wesley Frazier's sister, Lennie Mae, to agree that Oswald was carrying a bag so that she could keep her brother from going to the electric chair. So the sister, this Lennie Mae, says she was looking out the window and saw Oswald with this bag, this 2.5-foot long bag, which is not nearly long enough for a rifle. It's not big enough even if the rifle had been disassembled into 2 pieces. Oswald did not drive. He relied on Frazier to drive him to Irving, Texas. And there's no report, no account of Oswald taking all this paper to Irving, Texas to manufacture this brown bag for his gun. And there's another problem with the rifle bag story. Wesley Frazier's mom also looked out the window at that time when Oswald was getting into Wesley Frazier's car with Frazier, and she saw no bag. Oswald came over to the house, wasn't carrying a bag, and got into Frazier's car with no bag other than his small lunch bag, according to Frazier's mom. And when they arrived at the car at the book depository building, a man at the loading dock named Jack Doherty testified to the Warren Commission that Oswald was not carrying a bag when he arrived in the car with Frazier. Doherty didn't even see Oswald's small lunch bag because Oswald had stuffed his lunch bag into his pocket. It was a small bag for his lunch. This is also in the FBI 301 report. So you have 2 corroborating witnesses saying that Oswald was not carrying a big bag when he got in or out of the car with Wesley Frazier that day. And when Oswald was being interrogated by police, he was asked about this gun bag that he was supposedly carrying to work that day. And he said, "I wasn't carrying any bag. What are you talking about? All I had was my small lunch bag, which I stuffed into my coat pocket." Police asked him, "Well, what was in that bag?" Oswald answered, "My lunch. I eat the same lunch every day, a cheese sandwich and an apple. Then I always get a Coca-Cola out of the vending machine on the 2nd floor." And right after Oswald told the police this, the police immediately headed out to the Payne house where Marina and the baby girls were living. The police looked in the fridge, and sure enough, Oswald had cheese, apples, and the same kind of bread he said he had in his lunch bag. Also, when the rifle was first reported found by Officer Seymour Weitzman, he says the gun is a German Mauser. Here's his affidavit here, saying it was a bolt-action German Mauser. And in fact, that's what Walter Cronkite reports on the night of the assassination, that they had found a German Mauser on the 6th floor. And Officer Seymour Weitzman would know what he saw because he owned a sporting goods store on the side, which sold these kinds of rifles.
Just before Oswald's arrest, 2 different rifles had been found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Patrolman Roger Craig and Seymour Weitzman had discovered a 7.65 Mauser.
We weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches from the rifle, and stamped right on the barrel of the rifle was 7.65 Mauser.
The other rifle found was a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano.
Also, the rifle that Oswald supposedly ordered through the mail and that was shown originally looks nothing like the Oswald rifle used as evidence by the Warren Commission, and that's in the National Archives. This most recent gun used by the Warren Commission is much shorter. It looks like a pea shooter compared to the original Oswald gun that was displayed on November 22nd. You can just look at the rifle that was found and shown to the public initially, and the Oswald rifle that they have in the National Archives, and see that they're different rifles. They look nothing alike. The deep state must have seen that they needed a shorter rifle for it to fit in a 2.5-foot bag when disassembled. So I believe Fraser was the backup fall guy, the backup patsy if Oswald did not work out. So the police decided to terrorize this 19-year-old Fraser with threats of the electric chair and get him to say that Oswald was carrying this big brown bag for his rifle. And then they got his sister to back up the story so she could save her brother from the electric chair. Nor did she want to be charged with being an accomplice to the murder of the President of the United States. And without this story of Oswald carrying this big brown bag into the building that day, the police and the FBI had nothing on Oswald. This big brown bag, which the police didn't have because there was no brown bag, was critical to framing Lee Oswald, and it really moved public opinion against him. But the problem is Fraser's mom also saw Oswald get into the car that morning and saw that Oswald was not carrying a big brown bag for his gun. Now, Ruth Payne, who Marina was living with, was a key figure in the framing of Lee Oswald. When police asked Marina, Oswald's wife, if Lee owned a rifle, Marina said no. Lee doesn't own a rifle. But Ruth Payne said he did own a rifle. It's in the garage, she told police, wrapped in a green and brown blanket. Let's look at that, said police. They go look, and the rifle is gone, if there ever was a rifle there. And Ruth Payne's testimony carried weight with the Warren Commission, which was a fake investigation. Meanwhile, longtime FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was having trouble maintaining the official narrative during the first few days because the Dallas police were conducting their own investigation. The local FBI office in Dallas was also conducting its own investigation, not yet knowing what the official propaganda line was supposed to be. So early statements and reports by local law enforcement contradict what would end up being the official narrative put out by the Warren Commission. And in his memo dated November 24th, 2 days after JFK's killing, J. Edgar Hoover complained that the Dallas police were talking too much, which was messing up the official narrative that the FBI, that the national FBI, that J. Edgar Hoover was trying to put out. Quote, this is Hoover writing, Chief of Police Carey, I understand, can't control Captain Fritz of the Homicide Squad, who is giving up much information to the press. We want them to shut up, end quote. That's J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. Hoover's memo states, quote, there is nothing further on the Oswald case except that he's dead, end quote. Okay, everyone move along now. Got it? Got it. If Lee Oswald had not been killed by Jack Ruby 2 days after the killing of JFK, there's no way he would have been convicted. The case against him was a joke. Any good legal defense team would have torn the case against Oswald to pieces. So Oswald had to go, which closes the case against Oswald. And then the cover-up by the FBI, the CIA, and President Lyndon Johnson begins. And this is what torpedoes the thesis that the mob killed JFK, which is what I had always assumed, since Jack Ruby was a mob figure. Yes, the mob might well have been contracted by the CIA to kill JFK. That is how the CIA carries out assassinations inside the United States. The CIA and the mob also certainly had a common interest in eliminating JFK. But there was no incentive for the CIA, the FBI, and the President of the United States to cover up for a mob hit, unless they were in on the plot. Now let's talk a little bit about Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney who conducted the only prosecution in the killing of JFK. Much of the material in this video comes from Jim Garrison's investigation. Garrison's investigation also formed the basis for Oliver Stone's movie JFK on the killing of JFK. And what brought Jim Garrison into the case is Oswald was from New Orleans. After returning from Russia, Oswald lived in New Orleans until moving to Dallas 8 weeks before JFK's killing. How convenient, right? Pretty interesting. The timing is impeccable. Then he gets his job at the Book Depository building 5 weeks before JFK's killing. And CIA operative Ruth Payne got that job for Oswald. And the Oswalds were living in the home of Ruth and Michael Payne, who were both CIA operatives. Got it? Got it. So Garrison started looking into what Oswald was up to in New Orleans. And Garrison discovers that Oswald was working for a CIA operation in New Orleans led by Guy Bannister that included Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and others. Now the deep state dismisses Jim Garrison with mockery, pointing to the fact that a jury acquitted Clay Shaw in less than an hour after all this buildup. But keep in mind that this local district attorney from New Orleans was up against the CIA, President Lyndon Johnson, the FBI, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the entire deep state. And Garrison's key witnesses kept dying mysterious deaths. His office was bugged and ransacked. The files on his case were stolen out of his office. His phones were wiretapped. His witnesses, who were not outright murdered, fled the state of Louisiana. And then other states would not enforce his subpoenas, which is unheard of. And President Lyndon Johnson's Attorney General Ramsey Clark was put on the stand and just basically mocked Garrison. The United States Attorney General Ramsey Clark told the jury that the FBI checked out Clay Shaw. Nothing to see there. This was actually a mistake on Clark's part because it caused journalists to ask, wait, why was the FBI investigating Clay Shaw if what Jim Garrison is saying is so absurd? And keep in mind that the general public was not yet aware of the CIA's nefarious activities. This trial was in 1969, before Senator Frank Church's hearings and investigations into the CIA that exposed the CIA's political assassinations, MK-Ultra program, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Chaos, Operation Paperclip, and so forth. Now, most people like me assume that the CIA was doing mostly good things to protect the country, and would think it preposterous that the leadership of the CIA would assassinate the President of the United States. So Garrison had to overcome enormous public skepticism. Most people want to believe that the Attorney General of the United States is telling the truth. Garrison also charged Clay Shaw with perjury for denying that he knew Oswald or CIA operative David Ferry. Clay Shaw then died of cancer on October 15, 1974. Conveniently, it would seem. I view Jim Garrison as a national hero for being the first man to really take on the CIA and the deep state before anyone in the general public really had any clue how out of control the CIA had become. The only ones who were writing about how out of control the CIA was were lefty journalists and writers like Mark Lane, Jefferson Morley, Seymour Hersh. Anti-communist conservatives like me and my father were not taking these lefty writers seriously. I had always been very pro-CIA. Assumed that the CIA was doing mostly good things, trying to keep America safe. But ever since the CIA and the FBI tried to frame Donald Trump in 2016 and 2017 as an agent of Russia, the Russia collusion hoax, well, many libertarian-leaning conservatives like me have started to ask, what the hell is going on at the CIA? These lefty writers in the 1960s and 1970s turned out to have been 100% right about the CIA. Now, back then, the CIA was more right-leaning and anti-communist. Today, the CIA is more left-leaning. But whether more right-leaning in the 1960s or more left-leaning today, the CIA is really up to the same project. The CIA sees its primary mission, its primary project, not so much protecting America from foreign enemies, but to control the American people, which includes manipulating our elections with propaganda and PSYOP campaigns. And a major objective of the CIA is to advance the interests of the military-industrial complex, which is hugely profitable, a $1 trillion a year industry. Think about it. The United States buys trillions of dollars of weapons from companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and so on. We have 800 military bases around the world outside the United States. China only has one military base outside China. The United States spends more on its military than the rest of the world combined on military. If we stop having wars, how are these companies going to make money? What will all these generals do for work? Who will have jobs at the CIA and the Pentagon and the State Department? The way the CIA and the national security state keeps going and keeps growing is by creating fake national security crises, including false flag operations, such as the planned Operation Northwoods, halted by JFK when he learned about it. Ever wonder why the United States has been involved in nonstop wars since World War II? We had the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, 2 Iraq wars, the 19-year war in Afghanistan, the War on Terror, nonstop wars in the Middle East, the Ukraine War. So it's been nonstop wars since World War II. And the wars keep getting longer. World War II only lasted 4 years. Now the wars are perpetual. That was not the case before World War II. Back to Jim Garrison and his investigation into all of this. Jim Garrison was certainly no liberal. He was a rock-ribbed conservative from Louisiana. Garrison was in the Air Force. He flew missions over Germany during World War II, was in the artillery division that liberated the Dachau concentration camp in Germany. He got his law degree from Tulane University, served as assistant district attorney, won multiple elections for district attorney, then won multiple elections for judge. Jim Garrison was highly respected and loved in New Orleans, and he was highly intelligent. He was an expert on Shakespeare, had memorized Shakespeare's greatest works. He just stumbled into this CIA plot to kill JFK by accident. The more he pulled on the string, the more evidence he found that yes, indeed, the CIA did kill JFK. Jim Garrison was the first one with investigative power to really look at the CIA and what the deep state was actually doing. He was the first one to start peeling back the curtain. And a lot more information has come out since Jim Garrison's investigation that backs up his belief that the CIA killed JFK. In 1968, Johnny Carson, the famed comic and host of The Tonight Show, was tasked by the deep state with destroying Jim Garrison in the mind of the public with mockery. Johnny Carson had Jim Garrison on his show for a full hour. Now, I was a big fan of Johnny Carson when he was on the air for 30 years, used to watch him all the time. No one's been able to replace Johnny Carson as host of The Tonight Show, but he was definitely given a job here by the deep state, and that was to reduce Jim Garrison to a national laughingstock. And Garrison, of course, was not an entertainer.
Escaping from the worries of cooking for your family is easy when there is a Holiday Inn nearby.
The public responded favorably to Garrison. Johnny Carson, of course, was very popular, but NBC was flooded with letters complaining about Johnny Carson's treatment of Jim Garrison. NBC also ran a 1-hour documentary trashing Garrison, which I'll link to below. The CIA's propaganda machine was in full force against Jim Garrison, but he absolutely stood his ground. Garrison was given 30 minutes of airtime on NBC to respond to NBC's relentless trashing of Jim Garrison. NBC was required by the Fairness in Broadcasting law in place in that day to grant Garrison time to respond to the nonstop trashing of Jim Garrison by NBC. And Garrison delivered his rebuttal, his 30-minute rebuttal, with no notes. Here's an excerpt from that.
The following time period has been made available to District Attorney Jim Garrison of New Orleans to reply to an NBC News program broadcast on June 19th. In that program, NBC News examined some of the methods used by Mr. Garrison in his investigation of what he charges was a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy.
In the months to follow, you're going to learn that many of the things which some of the major news agencies have been telling you are untrue. You're going to learn that although you are citizens of the United States, information concerning the cause of the death of your president has been withheld from you. In the months to come, you will learn to your own satisfaction that President Kennedy was not killed by a lone assassin. You will learn that there has been and continues to be a concerted effort to keep you from learning these facts. And you will learn, I assure you, that what I have been trying to tell you and what I'm telling you tonight is true. The conclusion of the Warren Report that President Kennedy was killed by a lone assassin is a fairy tale. The truth about the assassination of the president has been concealed from you long enough. The evidence indicates that he was shot at from 2 different directions in the rear, and also from the right front. We know that shooting was coming from 2 separate directions in the rear because the president and Governor Connolly were hit in the back within a split second of each other. And this necessarily had to happen with 2 bullets coming from 2 different rifles. We know that the president was being shot at from the grassy knoll area on the right front because most of the people in Dealey Plaza heard the shots coming from there, and because at least one of the president's wounds was an entry wound from the front. and because men were seen running from the grassy knoll area immediately after. That's why the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin of the president is a fairy tale and should be brought to an end. If you, the people of the United States, will learn the truth that the president was assassinated by men who were once connected with a Central Intelligence Agency, of course, this might reflect on the dignity of the CIA. But I happen to believe that our form of government is strong enough to survive the truth. I believe that you are entitled to the truth about how your president was shot down in the street and how it was done. Instead, some of the most powerful news agencies we have in our country have worked hard to convince you that everything is all right. They do not tell you that Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints were not found on the gun which was supposed to have killed the president. And they do not tell you that nitrate tests exonerated Lee Oswald from the actual shooting by showing that he had not fired a rifle that day. And they do not tell you that it was virtually impossible for Oswald to have taken his fingerprints off the gun, hidden the gun, and gone down 4 flights of stairs by the time he was seen on the 2nd floor. Above all, they do not tell you of the overwhelming eyewitness testimony that shots were coming from behind the stone wall on the grassy knoll. This is why there continue to be hundreds of documents still hidden from your eyes and classified as secret, and some of them bear such titles as Lee Harvey Oswald's accessibility to information about the U-2, the Central Intelligence Agency's dossier on Lee Harvey Oswald, and the CIA file on Jack Ruby. You have not been told that Lee Oswald was in the employ of United States intelligence agencies, but this was the case, and so I am telling you. Why, this young, uneducated man had learned to speak Russian even before he left the Marines, and there's only one way he could have learned that. Oswald had a higher security rating than his buddies in his Marine unit. During 12 hours of questioning, to give you another example, 12 hours of questioning after the assassination, there is no transcript of Oswald's statements available for you to look at. Now, it doesn't matter where you live. If somebody in your town steals a 1928 Hupmobile, what he says is written down when he's questioned. However, when the man who has just killed the President of the United States is questioned for 12 hours, no transcript is available. There's nothing for you to look at. This case has more accidental fires, more burning of paper than any murder case in history. For example, when Oswald was questioned by a federal agent in August of 1963, the notes of the interview were later burned. You cannot see the notes made by Commander Humes concerning the President's autopsy because he burned them too. One of the questioners of Lee Harvey Oswald during the 12-hour session burned his notes. And similarly, when the Warren Commission contacted the State Department and said, with regard to Exhibit 948, we noticed that a one-page message from the CIA containing secret information is supposed to be attached to this file, and it's missing. Would you please furnish us with a copy of this missing secret document? The answer given to the Warren Commission was that the secret message about Oswald from the CIA was accidentally destroyed while being thermofaxed. This spontaneous combustion, incidentally, occurred the day after the President's assassination. I'm not even going to bother to dignify the foolishness which Newsweek and NBC and some of the other news agencies have tried to make you believe about my office. I've been District Attorney of New Orleans for more than 5 years, and we have never had a single case reversed because of improper methods on the part of our staff. Nor do we rush to judgment on half-baked evidence. And the proof of that is the fact that in more than 5 years, not one defendant has walked out of the courtroom in a murder case with an acquittal. Nor have we lost a major case in 5 years. Then what is their game? Their game is to fool you. These people want the investigation stopped. They don't think we're wrong in our investigation. Obviously, if our investigation was as haywire as they would like to have you think, then you would not see such a coordinated barrage coming from the news centers in the East. There has been an effort to prejudice in advance the potential jurors in the trial of this case. As a matter of fact, the National Broadcasting Company has already had the trial. The defendant was found innocent, and the district attorney was convicted. They're telling you that black is white when they tell you there is no evidence of a conspiracy. They have to know well the significance of the continued concealment of X-rays and autopsy pictures, which, if revealed to you, would show that the president was hit by rifle fire from more than one direction. And they have to know well of the hundreds of documents which remain classified secret and concealed from your view. They have to know all of this, but they have lent themselves to the all-out effort to convince you that the matter's been looked into, and anyone who raises a question now is irresponsible or a troublemaker or an enemy of the people. What's that? You say that you are an American citizen and you want to see the autopsy X-rays, and you want to see these hundreds of documents that have been withheld from your view, and you want to know why these vital notes always ended up being burned? What's the matter with you? Can't you take the word of these honorable men who've looked into it for you? Let me just give you one example that shows you how impossible the single assassination theory is, which shows you the enormity of the fairy tale which you're supposed to believe in. Now, this is the Warren Commission's own diagram of the route of the bullet through Governor Connally. The bullet had to take this route in order to cause the injuries which he received. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that the Warren Commission itself concedes that if this same bullet was not the one which also went through President Kennedy, then there had to be someone else firing. And the reason for that, just to put it very simply, is the Zapruder films have shown that all the firing occurred in 6 seconds, and yet there were a total of 8 wounds. Therefore, this one bullet has to cause 7 wounds, because one missed, and one was the fatal shot hitting the president. So, by the Warren Commission's own admission, prior to hitting the governor, this bullet had to go through President Kennedy, who is sitting back here. Now, you'll notice that the Warren Commission did not attempt to include President Kennedy in the diagram. They could not, because the total impossibility of this bullet having gone through the president also would be too obvious. In other words, by the evidence of the Warren Commission itself, it is obvious that there was other shooting going on in Dealey Plaza. Consequently, the Warren Commission has officially concluded that before this bullet came down from the sky, as it had to hit Governor Connally and all those different places, it entered President Kennedy's body from the rear and came out of his neck. I might add that the Warren Commission did not try to include the president's picture because that would have shown that the course of the magic bullet would have had to gone up in the air and come down again in order to end up hitting the governor. It is by selecting these little portions of each incident and by excluding other portions that the fairy tale is presented to you. However, if they had to show in one diagram the bullet entering the president and then continuing through Governor Connally, you would be able to see the total impossibility of this bullet causing 7 wounds. Now, this is just one of many examples which show that the Warren Commission's conclusion is completely impossible. Bullet 399 is another example. The fact that the cartridges in the Tippit case do not match at all the bullets in Tippit's body, one after the other. If I had the total hour to reply, which NBC used to try and discredit my office, I would be able to go into more matters. Let's sum it up by saying that it is completely impossible to uphold the single assassin theory if you look at it seriously. Anyone who has done their homework knows that the single assassin theory is totally impossible.
Now let's talk about Judith Very Baker. Here's her book, Lee and Me. Now this might be the most bizarre part of the video. I wasn't sure I was even going to bring her into this video because she's generally treated with mockery and derision by the anti-conspiracy theorists, and much of what she says is hard to believe. However, a lot of what she says can be corroborated independently. Judith Baker says she got pulled into working on the CIA's MK-Ultra cancer bioweapon program. She also says she had an affair with Lee Oswald. Oswald and Marina were having marital problems, and Judith Baker was nationally recognized as early as high school for her cancer research. She grew up in South Bend, Indiana. And while Judith was in high school, she worked under Nobel Prize-winning cancer researcher Gertrude Elion. After graduating in 1961, Judith moved to Buffalo, where she worked on a cancer research project. Her research at the Rockwell Park Memorial Institute continued through the spring of 1963 at the University of Florida. And all this is corroborated by publicly available sources. Judith Baker says she met Lee Oswald when he was living in New Orleans after his return from the Soviet Union from April 1963 to September 25, 1963. She said she had an affair with Oswald and that she was very much in love with Lee Oswald. And because Judith was a young prodigy in the field of cancer research, she came to the attention of renowned cancer scientist Dr. Alton Ochsner at Tulane University, who it turns out was a scientist with the CIA's MK-Ultra program. He recruited Judith Baker through Lee Oswald, who introduced Baker to both Dr. Alton Ochsner and Dr. Mary Sherman. Judith was promised a full scholarship at Tulane University Medical School if she worked for them. And it soon became clear to her that she was working on a cancer-causing bioweapon for the CIA. Now, she was anti-Castro and anti-communist. She was told that using this cancer bioweapon to kill Castro was preferable to the U.S. invading Cuba militarily and toppling Castro that way, which might trigger World War III. And the U.S. had tried that in 1961 with the botched Bay of Pigs invasion. Then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which almost started a thermonuclear war. So yeah, better just kill Castro with this cancer-causing bioweapon that they were working on. And it would be Lee Oswald's job to get into Cuba and infect Castro with this cancer-causing bioweapon. And that's why Oswald was very publicly building up his credentials as a pro-Castro Marxist. And to do this, Oswald started this Fair Play for Cuba committee, of which he was the only member. He also conducted TV interviews defending Castro and his Marxist views.
No, sir, I'm not a communist, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
But as we have seen, Oswald was actually a strong anti-communist. He was a CIA spy, and as we have seen, was operating out of Guy Bannister's undercover CIA office in the Newman Building in New Orleans, where David Ferrie and Clay Shaw were a constant presence. They were working with the anti-Castro Cuban insurgents. These operatives were all staunch anti-communist Cold Warriors, to the point of being unhinged about the communist threat. And Judith Baker was also very anti-Castro and anti-communist. So all this sounded great to her, that she would be involved in helping the CIA kill Castro. And she would do her patriotic duty and work on this cancer-causing bioweapon for the CIA to kill Castro. According to Judith Baker, David Ferrie's kitchen at his apartment was transformed into a cancer research lab, where Judith Baker says she would spend most of her time. And at this lab in David Ferrie's apartment, she says she would inject mice with explosively aggressive cancers and watch the tumors grow. Oswald would then take Judith Baker's cancer material to another lab that was run by Dr. Mary Sherman. And cancer cells could be made more aggressive if subjected to radiation. And that's what Dr. Mary Sherman was doing at her lab, according to Baker. And Judith Baker, also says that Oswald and Ferrie introduced her to Jack Ruby. And Jack Ruby told Judith Baker that Ruby had known Lee Oswald since he was a kid. So this account would back up Jack Ruby's belief that he was injected with super aggressive cancer cells in December of 1966, just 2 months before his second trial was supposed to start. and he was perfectly healthy before his cancer diagnosis in December of 1966. Now, anti-conspiracy theorists dismiss Judith Baker as a nut and her book as fiction. And I include her account here because much information in her book can be independently corroborated. We know for a fact that Dr. Mary Sherman was working on a fast-acting cancer bioweapon under the direction of Dr. Alton Oshner at Tulane University, and that he was a scientist with the CIA's MKUltra program. And Tulane University was a major MKUltra institution. And we know that Dr. Mary Sherman predictably ended up dead in her New Orleans apartment on July 21, 1984. Her death was ruled a murder, and it was a horrific death. Dr. Mary Sherman was stabbed and slashed multiple times in her throat and stomach, to such an extent that her internal organs were pouring out. Her body was also badly burned. Her arm was virtually disintegrated. The official version was that she was murdered and set on fire at her apartment. But there were no witnesses at her apartment complex to any of this. You would think that such a violent murder and being set on fire would produce noise, but there were no signs of forced entry. So many believe that Dr. Mary Sherman was murdered somewhere else and her charred body brought to her apartment. Now, it's easy for people to dismiss videos like this as conspiracy theory because people don't want to believe that the U.S. government is evil. Now, I believe that the vast majority of rank-and-file CIA and FBI agents are probably fine and doing good work. It's the upper echelons that are evil. Not all, but enough. And I'm sure there are many good people in the upper echelons as well. But the operations of the CIA are so compartmentalized that the left hand often doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Operatives just do what they're told and assume that it's good for the country. This is why secrecy in government is so dangerous and why transparency is so important. I don't worry about communist China or Vladimir Putin. I'm far more concerned about our own government. And I'm not talking about our elected officials. They're here today and gone tomorrow. I'm talking about the upper echelons of the permanent bureaucracy, particularly the CIA and America's national security state. I'd like to hear what you think about this. Who do you think killed JFK? Do you believe the Warren Commission version of events? That Lee Oswald killed JFK? That he acted alone? And that he was driven to kill JFK by his fanatical Marxist ideology? Do you share the Warren Commission's narrative that Jack Ruby was just another unhinged nut, acting alone when he shot and killed Lee Oswald in the basement of that Dallas police station? Or do you think the CIA killed JFK and set up Lee Oswald as the fall guy, as I believe? And how about those 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump in the months leading up to the 2024 election? Do you think these 2 guys, Thomas Matthew Crooks and Wesley Ryan Ruth, were just a couple of wackos acting alone with no help from anyone else? Check out my video on that here. Or do you agree with John F. Kennedy when he said we need to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds? And I would add to this the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and every federal agency not explicitly mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, which is 95% of them. We need to start over with our federal government, tear it up completely. We need to cut our federal government down to constitutional size, which is about 10% the size it is now. The number one threat to the freedom and safety of Americans is not communist China or Vladimir Putin. It's the CIA and the deep state, and more broadly our unelected, permanent federal bureaucracy. But the CIA is the head of the snake because the CIA operates in secret. It's not accountable to anyone, not to the president, not even to Congress. And if you're the government with a monopoly on power and you're allowed to operate in total secret, well, that's how evil is allowed to fester and grow. Sunlight is always the best disinfectant. We should have no secrets in government, except in matters of true national security of the highest level and true necessity. There should be no more fake national security justifications for secrecy in government. Well, that's about all I have for you today. Let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments below. And be sure to follow me on X. I'm posting all the time. I link to my X account below. Also, check out my books on Amazon, which are available in all the formats. Also linked below. One is Bitcoin, a beginner's guide. Bitcoin is freedom money because it's unconfiscatable money, so long as you self-custody your Bitcoin. And Bitcoin protects you from the government's fiat money printer because there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins for 8 billion people. Bitcoin removes humans from the governance of the money. Bitcoin separates money from state. So Bitcoin is uncorruptible money. Bitcoin is the Second Amendment for your money. If the shit hits the fan here and we become a totalitarian country, you're going to want to be able to carry your wealth with you to wherever freedom might still exist. That's what Bitcoin is for. The second book is Win Life: Success Skills Schools Don't Teach. This book is primarily aimed at young people who are just getting launched in life, but will help anyone who wants to be in the top 1% of income and wealth. Or maybe you have more modest goals. Maybe you're just interested in losing 20 pounds. This book will help you do that as well. This book will help you achieve most of what you want to achieve in life.